All right, everybody, we are doing something fun for the month of October, baby. We are doing a series on John Carpenter, the man, the myth, the legend. We're going to be doing some film reviews, and joining me to do that is Dr. Douglas Bielmeier, whose album, Music for Billionaires, will be out this month, October 27th.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Doug, welcome back. We're going to have some fun with this.
Yes. Like I said, this summer, I just watched every John Carpenter movie in preparation for this. So I feel like I did like a summer course in John Carpenter movies. So I'm excited. I don't know if I'm qualified. To do this, but I definitely have the background now. I have the background. I've seen the movies. So.
Well, of the two of us, only one has a doctor in front of his name, so I think your qualifications trump mine. But
right, but it was an online program, so
yeah, it was one of those get it in 24 hours, and it comes from somewhere in the Eastern Bloc or former Eastern Bloc. Yeah,
right. Yeah, Samoa. Yeah.
The Chernobyl, the Technical Institute.
Chernobyl Academy Technical Institute. Yep. Chit, as we call it. Chit, for short. Yeah.
I know Chit, all right. All right. So basically what Doug and I did, I don't even remember whose idea. We kind of came up with this on the fly in email, I think.
Yeah.
And just because we wanted to talk about movies. And John Carpenter has not only the visual element, but of course he's famous for his music and now is basically a musician. He's almost entirely given up on filmmaking, pretty much.
Yeah.
So I think so we came up with a set of movies, and we picked blindly. You and I did not consult. We just said, all right, we're just going to pick 3 movies.
Yeah.
And then when you sent me your list and I sent the list, I looked at them and I said, you know what's weird about this list is these movies sort of pair together. And not intentionally. It's just, synchronicity of whatever floating through the universe. Or, John Carpenter's cigarette smoke somehow influenced our choices. I don't know what it is. But however, so I'll give the list. We're going to do 2 per episode. So the list itself is, or should we make it a surprise? You want to save it for each episode? What do you think? I'm going to leave this up to you.
I don't know. Surprise is good.
Yeah, screw it. Surprise. Surprise.
Yeah, let's do a surprise. Yeah. So we know, they will know that we each picked 3 blindly. And did we even discuss, did we even say like, pick one from this era or that?
Nothing. No, we did nothing except we said, let's pick ones that might be interesting to talk about.
Absolutely.
And in particular, as a bit of a teaser, open at the open, the second pairing I think is the most interesting because it's an inverse set, and that's all I'll say. And that might give people a clue, but it's a very inverse type of a set of movies for what we're doing. But let's talk about what we're talking about here. Let's start off with, for anybody who might not somehow know, I shouldn't say it like that. You know what? I know people are young now and I'm not. Right. So maybe people haven't seen John Carpenter and he doesn't make movies anymore, really. So why don't we lay out who John Carpenter is, and I'll let you do a little bit of background on him, and let's talk about the man.
All right. So John Carpenter, and like you said, if you grew up, when we grew up, you probably know the name because, definitely in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, I mean, if you were watching a horror film, if you were watching any type of science fiction, you always would reference probably John Carpenter and something that he had done. So if you know or you don't know, John Carpenter is an American filmmaker, actor, and composer. And although he's worked in many film genres over the years, he is most commonly associated with horror, action, and science fiction films, primarily from the 1970s and 80s. I mean, he's been active. You alluded a little bit to how he's almost kind of like a full-time musician now, from all the great film scores that he's created. But his bread and butter is really in the 70s, 80s, and I would say 90s. He's also considered and recognized as one of the greatest masters of horror and of the horror genre. And it's funny because to me, I don't really see his movies as horror films. I mean, obviously Halloween, like, yes, that is like, the pinnacle of horror. But as we'll talk about on this series, we won't talk about Halloween, at least not the first film. And we'll talk about a lot of his other kind of more interesting, not more interesting, but just kind of more divergent, maybe more science fiction type films.
Interestingly, and I don't mean to interrupt, but interestingly, the 3 movies that I would default to as far as his horror films, we will not be talking about any of them. Halloween, The Fog, and The Thing. None of them.
Right.
None of those movies will come up.
Maybe Christine then also too. Maybe Christine. And
I always thought Christine was more of like a drama, but I mean, there's a horror element. But I always keyed in on the kid and the fact that he was so bullied. But you're right, it is a horror. It is a Stephen King adaptation, therefore it is horror.
Well, and I was watching I think I watched the trailer for Christine, and it was like a 1983 release, and it was like, John Carpenter, master of, film, and Stephen King, master of horror, like team up for this movie. And I was just like, oh, you could like just smell the popcorn in the 1980s, like, just like add hoopla. So, you're right. The other movies that we're going to look at are any of them really horror? One of them could be classified. One of the the last pairing is probably the closest to horror films.
Oh,
that's right. Yeah.
But even those compare. See, the problem is, well, not the problem. The thing is, the thing is such an insanely high bar, and Halloween as far as one really defined a type of slasher genre for Americans particularly. And then the other is such an FX masterpiece in just over-the-top horror and a paranoia film, unlike many others, that it's hard to get to those heights. Even his better movies in a horror space cannot live up to that. I mean, he defined it so well.
Yeah, and The Thing, the 1982 release, that is the textbook case for effects and creature design. That is like when you look in the textbook of film production, set design, not animatronics so much, but definitely a design of what's the word?
Practical creature effects. Really, it's practical creature effects.
Absolutely, that is the Project Zero. That is the sort of not the beginning, but definitely for the sort of modern era and the effects that were done on that film. So yeah, I guess, I guess he is a master of horror, and because he has a lot of these great films that for one reason or another are sort of these benchmarks of American horror films.
Yeah. So we're going to start off. So the pairing, I don't think we mentioned the pairing for this particular episode. So that's John Carpenter. Who, if you ever get the chance to see him live, absolutely do so. I got a chance to see him 5-6 years ago do one of his concerts where he plays all the themes, and it's fantastic. But
he's put out like what is it, like 5 albums in like 2015, 16, 17, and just in 2021 he put out these albums referred to as the Lost Themes.
Yep, I have them all. I have his live album, which is fantastic. Oh yeah, I have it all. I mean, I'll eat anything up that he puts out. It's fantastic. So and funny too, because synth music has made a resurgence, and a lot of it goes back to that type of thing. And he was one of the early people who was doing very simple but very effective synth scores, where it's not big and orchestral the way some of them tended to be around that time period, where they're trying to overdo it. It's all pretty effective and minimal. So the two movies, let's get to them. So the two movies we're doing for this pairing are going to be Assault on Precinct 13 from 1976 and the probably far more well-known Escape from New York from 1981. And we're going to basically start off, and we're going to talk about each of these films, and we're going to talk a little bit about the making of them, and then get into the actual films themselves, because particularly with Assault on Precinct 13, this is a criminally unknown film, in my opinion. Most people have not seen this one, and it is every bit as good as Escape from New York. So do you want to do a summary of the basic plot of the film?
Yeah, let's talk about it. It's so it's a 1976 release, according to the IMDb page here. Assault on Precinct 13 is a 1976 American action thriller film, so it's calling it action thriller. It was written, directed, scored, and edited by John Carpenter. It stars Austin Stoker as a police officer who defends a defunct precinct against a relentless criminal gang, along with Darwin Joston, I believe that's how I pronounce it, as a convicted murderer who helps him. There's also actress Lori Zimmer is in it. She was in. Do you remember the movie Escape from Witch Mountain?
Yes.
Kind of like yeah. She was a star in that, and then there's of course a bunch of other actors as well. I guess just a real quick like blurb about where the film came from. Apparently, Carpenter was approached by the producer of the film, Kaplan, And basically, it was to make a low-budget exploitation film. So if you're not familiar, exploitation film were popular 60s, 70s, and 80s, and were basically any type of film that was trying to capitalize on a trend. And they usually were pretty kind of lewd or like, rough or gritty. And basically,
they generally capitalized on a particular element of a genre film. So if it was a horror film, it would be just gore upon gore. Yeah. If it was action, it would just be people shooting nonstop with no care about how many bullets were in the mag.
Right,
if it was a sex film, you would just have TNA and barely a plot to hang it on, just short of being a porn film. That's exploitation. The best modern example for people that people might know is Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez did a double feature, which was Planet Terror and Death Proof, and that was their riff on grindhouse films, which were typically movies that ran at midnight in low-run theaters that they were just basically selling sex and violence to anybody who would pay a ticket. That's an exploitation film.
Absolutely, and the interesting part about how low the budget was for this film. Basically, the charge Kaplan gave Carpenter was to make the movie for under, and I'm reading this correctly, $100,000. So when I first read this, I thought it was $100 million, and I was just like, oh, well, that's actually like a pretty high budget for a movie. So this was to create the whole film for under $100,000. And the condition was then that Carpenter would have total creative control over the project. I guess speaking of the script, Carpenter's originally titled it The Anderson Alamo, and it was inspired by two movies, actually. Rio Bravo, which I don't know if I've seen that film. It's a Western, which makes a lot of sense as we start talking about the movie, but also by George A. Romero's horror film classic horror film, Night of the Living Dead. And just one other note, I guess, despite some of the controversy from the Motion Picture Association involving, and we'll probably talk about this, there's a violent sort of killing in the movie. The film received an R rating and opened in the United States on November 5th, 1976.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, did not do all that well in the States, but did much better, I believe, when it opened overseas. So, yeah, interesting. Good.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't until 1977 at the London Film Festival where it started sort of picking up some kind of momentum, and it was praised for just being this really visceral film. And then, of course, since then it's kind of turned into this sort of cult classic.
Yeah, and it was remade. Not very
I was going to
well.
say, do we want to talk? I was going to say, do we want to talk about the 2005 remake?
I mean, look, there's not really that much to say. It is hardly the worst remake I've ever seen. I've seen far worse. I think that it, as many remakes do, missed the point of what was good about the original. I think that's its biggest sin. I don't. This is not a movie that I could. I mean, Carpenter himself famously does not care about his remakes. He's like, as long as you pay me, you can remake it with a bowl of dog crap for all I care. Which is, his cynicism is like my spirit animal. I love it. It's just fantastic.
A dog of bull crap, or Ethan Hawke. Either one.
Yeah. So I think this is actually a movie that could be remade and could be something. Could be a good remake. I just don't think the one that they did was, much like when they tried to make a prequel to The Thing. I'm not really sure what the thinking was there.
Wow.
But,
Yeah, I saw that too. Yeah, who I would totally trust to make a remake of Assault on Precinct 13? Quentin Tarantino. I think
Quentin Tarantino would be good.
It would be amazing, and I think he would bring his dialogue style, his sort of dialogue, extreme violence, dialogue, extreme violence.
Yeah. I would also be curious what Michael Mann would do with this, because it would just be interesting to see. And that's the thing is, I often complain about remakes, but it's just because they don't seem like they're done with very much effort. You put the right person in charge of it. I always mention the Suspiria remake. I think is one of the most amazing remakes that takes the original and recontextualizes it in such a wonderful way. And it's a completely different movie because the person who made it knew what they wanted to do with the material. So,
well, Michael Mann would be fantastic for this because even with Get Tangerine Dream back, get the band back together, have them do the soundtrack, it would be great.
So let's jump into the actual movie and start dissecting it a bit. So the first thing right off the bat that's interesting about this film that I Don't know if any other movie of his, but I have not watched them all, so I don't know, is there is no John Carpenter's in the title card, which is highly unusual. So in most of his films, it's John Carpenter's movie title. This one is not. It is just Assault on Precinct 13 in a very stark red font. And we immediately jump into probably one of my favorite themes of his, which we're going to play, which is the Assault on Precinct 13 theme. And Doug, if you want to talk about it as it plays, feel free. I will have nothing to contribute besides I like it a lot. So
let's just take a listen to it and enjoy it. It's so
Here
good.
we go. It's great. Man, I love that theme. My notes right for that are great theme, starts off simple, builds, then recedes back to simplicity, which if you listen to the whole thing, it recedes right back down and goes back to simple again.
Just that bum, 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 bum. Yep. And that sort of repetitive pattern. And it's such a quintessential, I mean, it's one of the first Carpenter themes, but that is not unlike the other ones, you know, and even later on when we won't talk about the thing, but even in the thing where I'm forgetting the composer's name, but he had a composer,
Ennio Morricone from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Morricone, that's right. And so he had Morricone compose the theme, but in a Carpenter-esque way. So even by that film, there was already sort of some like what it means to, you know, make a Carpenter theme, and typically that big bass line or the, you know, like in The Fog, we hear this like boom boom like throughout. I think in what is it, Prince of Damned or Prince of Darkness, there's that same sort of just like ad nauseum throughout the movie, just this boom boom, you know, these sort of kind of repeating patterns, and it just builds so much suspense, and it also kind of just like keeps pushing us forward. For me though, one of the things that makes this theme just awesome is when that second higher synth comes in, not the last one we just heard as it started to fade, but the one that second synth, and it's like a little bit out of tune. It's like the oscillator isn't like quite like getting up to speed fast enough, so there's just this wonderful like kind of push and pull between the two lines, and it just makes it feel like you're like, this is a real synth that's doing this. This doesn't feel like computer music or robotic music. I think it just gives it this real life. And, you know, you made a comment earlier about like a lot of times films of that era, they would have some type of big orchestral thing, or, you know, I even think about the Dirty Harry movies, which were kind of gritty movies of that time. They had, you know, a lot of like jazz and like the, you know, big band production music, but to have just a really, you know, stark synth, that in itself like creates this whole vibe that I think carries throughout the movie, that kind of like isolation.
I always feel like his themes are like a literal spine to the movie. I always visualize like a spine with the ribs coming around, because there is this, that's where the repetitive nature comes in. But also, like you said, he's, instead of just bombarding you with a lot of sound, which can be fine. It's not that there's anything necessarily against that, but there's so much strength in the simplicity of the compositions, at least from my ear, where it's just like, nope, he's picked all these notes and he's isolated everything really well, so that when he kicks this thing in, it's either a sign that something important is happening, or it's just, it gives such a character to the movies that a lot of other composers, I mean, there's lots of great composers, but he has this signature to his work that is just amazing.
I think it does two things. I think you're absolutely right. I think the simplicity creates a backbone for a scene. So when, especially like in Precinct 13, there's scenes where he brings it in to be like, okay, we're moving forward, the action's happening, you know, some of the real violent clashes with the gangs. He'll use that to kind of preempt some of the violence. But in that same respect, they're plain enough and they're simplistic enough that dialogue can be happening, other things can be going on, and it doesn't interfere. And, you know, you mentioned Michael Mann like earlier, and one of the things I love about his films is he just lets the music roll. You know, like I feel like in some movies it's like, this is the B-roll, so we'll have music. You know, it's like really bad episodes of Baywatch, right? When they're like scanning the beach, there's like this horrible 90s music, and then when David Hasselhoff's talking, like there's no music or whatever. I don't know why I just referenced Baywatch, but anyways, we're going Baywatch.
Well, it's a touch point for how not to use music and visuals. So you did well.
And everyone, I feel like everyone understands that. But I think, and just like with Michael Mann, like how he kind of like keeps the music rolling. Even Christopher Nolan films, you know, like how the sound in those Hans Zimmer scores just like keep rolling. So it just bleeds, one scene bleeds into the next, and it kind of keeps the momentum and kind of keeps that sort of theme going. So I think, you know, a trained composer might like really try to go crazy and have this like really dynamic score and have it be really intricate. But I think he just has this innate ability to know what's enough to be, like you said, be that backbone, but then what also, what is enough to let, you know, a movie happen and have action and dialogue happen on top.
And as you pointed out before we started recording, there really are only two themes in this entire film. And they are wildly different. We'll play the other one as we get to sort of the part of the movie, because my notes are kind of chronological. So as I watched it, I was taking notes the whole way through. Awesome. So right after we get this tremendous theme, we get a scene where we see basically no-faced people being shot by cops in it's a very interesting movie to watch now, because you have to remember this movie is almost 50 years old at this point.
Wow.
Yeah,
I feel so
crazy,
old.
right?
I feel so old. Yeah.
I know, I hear you. I mean, this movie's only 2 years older than me, so you think you feel.
I was going to say, I wasn't alive when this movie was being filmed, so I wasn't. I hadn't existed yet. So,
but I don't think it's inaccurate to say that the police in this film come off as stormtroopers. They come off as shock troopers. They're except for Lieutenant Bishop, who is very different looking than every other police officer we see in a number of ways, and is reacted to in interesting ways by the two white officers in the precinct. But when we first see it, we don't even see police officers really. We just see shotguns, and we just see people getting gunned down. And then there's an interesting bit of audio that we get as background radio to kind of contextualize what we just saw. And I'm going to play it and key in on one particular phrase after I play it. So I'm going to play it here.
And in the local news, 6 youth gang members were killed in a shootout last night with police in South Los Angeles. Police Commissioner Davidson called a news conference earlier this morning to comment on the shooting.
As Police Commissioner of Los Angeles County, I have called this emergency news conference. We have a crisis. The juvenile gang problem is completely out of control. The missing automatic weapons have not been recovered. We now have a lead which shows that some of the weapons have fallen into the wrong hands. It's true that law enforcement is being driven to deplorable extremes. but those guns are out there. And believe me, if the people who have them get organized, no one will stand a chance.
Now, the interesting part about that clip comes at the end where he says the police have been driven to horrible extreme measures. And it's such a specific, because remember, none of this is written in accident. This is not something that where the words fall on the page and people don't think about what they're saying.
Right.
There's such a specific viewpoint, it feels like, about the police in general, that we see almost both sides of the good and the bad when it comes to policing. Because obviously one of our main protagonists is very clearly positioned as a good officer, capital G, capital O, good officer.
Yeah.
But you also see moments where the police are shown to be, like when they gun those people down, they are faceless. All we see is gunfire and shotguns.
Right.
And we're told they're youths. These are young kids.
And there was no confrontation. It was a turkey shoot.
Yes.
They were in this long, it's a really great opening scene where there's these, young men, they have weapons. So that's the only thing we can identify is that they have weapons in their hand. They're going into this very dark, narrow sort of alleyway.
It's a kill corridor. They're being funneled into a kill zone.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's not by accident. And the fact that we can't see the officers' faces. I thought when I first saw this film, I thought that was a device to be, well, maybe they weren't really police. Maybe these were, people pretending to be the police that were creating some type. I thought there was going to be some like plot point about how some people were impersonating officers. But it's funny now after, looking through the movie. They were just, they just executed these young men.
Yeah, it's like I said, I think the movie is actually pretty balanced in the way that it shows law enforcement, but that is a particularly interesting choice far years before the stuff that goes on now, where there is a lot of discussion around police reform, and no matter which side you fall on it, that's fine. But this is a film that, remember, is almost 50 years back that shows a very interesting couple of different ways to see policing. And then...
Well, even just okay. So let's talk about it. You mentioned it. I mean, the lead character is black, and Austin Stoker is the actor. And we're like, yeah, man, it's 2023. Like, what's your point? But this was 1976, and I'm trying to think of some of the other sort of gritty movies of that time. Definitely, there's in the Dirty Harry movies, there is the use of the N-word, and there is some. Not some of Clint Eastwood's best moments and writing in that time, but I try to think about some of the other sort of low budget horror films or his sort of contemporaries, and you look at he said that Night of the Living Dead was a real source of inspiration for this movie, and sure enough, that is let's see, that's Dwayne Jones, in the lead actor in that movie is black, which in 1978 that came out. That was just like what is going on? What is this movie? Why are we having a black actor in this movie? But even then, Dawn of the Dead later on, when you have a really strong performance by
Ken Foree? I don't remember which is.
Ken Foree. And he has a very prominent role in that movie as well. So like today we're like, yeah, obviously like people are just in movies and that's fine. But I think that's a really interesting aspect of these movies, is that they are very violent. They are political, but then they're also taking risks or, giving screen time to actors that might not normally have that time. So right off the bat, we have these faceless cops gunning, criminals. It was people carrying guns. So there was maybe some intent to do a criminal act, but we're seeing basically, we're seeing a firing squad followed then by a capital G good cop of color in a car getting sent to basically babysit a precinct that is now defunct.
Yes, and I want to mention, we do get after the opening shooting scene, which let's also point out, they were not aiming at the police when they got shot. They were in fact massacred. So just because they were carrying weapons, And don't get me wrong, I don't think we were meant to think that they were, going to sell candy door to door.
Right.
But
they weren't going to an ice cream social. I don't think they were. But,
in an era where we hear about, what is deadly force and when is it authorized,
Yes.
this is deadly force with no perceivable threat to the officers.
Okay, just real quick, one more thing on that. That was my whole thing. I was like, so are they trying to, is this a set issue? Is that why the corridor is so narrow? But it's like you exactly said. It's kind of like a herding cattle into a sort of a kill zone. And,
I don't believe it's accidental because they could have swung the guns up right before it happened, and that would tell you.
There was no confrontation.
Right.
It was a one-sided execution. Absolutely.
Yes. So then we get a brief shot showing a set of multiracial gang members taking a blood oath, and I should note that one of them is the guy who plays Romero, right there, name check, in Escape from New York, the guy with the giant hair. That is the guy who has the sniper rifle and has probably the most well-known scene in the movie, which we'll get to.
Right.
But right there we have an actor from a stable of actors. John Carpenter is one of many directors who uses the same type of people or the same actual actors. And then we do get an intro to our two main characters. And I'm jumping around a little bit, so feel free to interrupt me, Doug, if I'm jumping too quick.
Yeah, no, this is
but
great.
then we get, as you said, the intro to Bishop, which I have pulled the audio from so that you have, because I think his dialogue and his assignment tell you everything you need to know about this character, so I'll play it right here.
1W90, this is Lieutenant Bishop in unmarked vehicle requesting assignment. The staff 7 there?
Stand by. 1W20, this is Staff 4. If I look around real hard, maybe I can find something for you to do.
Hey, Captain Collins. Hello there. I'm surprised to hear your voice, sir.
W20, so how's it going so far, Lieutenant?
1W90, okay. Seeing as I've been on the job exactly 4 minutes.
W20, I've got a temporary reassignment for you tonight, a little supervisory job for the police department. Proceed to Precinct 9, Division 13, and take over from Captain Gordon.
Isn't that the Anderson precinct?
Affirmative.
But they're closing it down. There's nothing for me to do there except stare at the packing crates.
You want to be a hero your first night out, Lieutenant?
Yes, sir.
There are no heroes anymore, Bishop. Only men who follow orders.
W90, yes, sir. Proceeding to Precinct 9, Division 13.
KMA 492, off.
There again, just if you pay attention to the written words, fascinating because there's so much that's communicated in that minute and about 20 seconds. You get the idea of Bishop, the way he's talking to the commanding officer. I'd love to be a hero. I want something to do. First night on the job, all the kind of stuff is there. And the responses, too, are that there are no more heroes anymore. That's, again, this is not accidental writing. So there's a lot of intention in this movie, but it's a perfect setup for this character. I love it.
Yeah, and I think that's the Carpenter. That's the Carpenter genius, or just the talent is at face value. A lot of times you could watch these movies and at face value you'd say, okay, this is like a B movie and it's really gory or it's really violent, but there's that cynicism, there's that perspective, there's that sort of political side that comes out in very subtle ways. And reflecting back on the movie after having watched it, there's a lot of stuff you take for granted, and I'll talk about a few of those, but that's one of them there, where, this whole kind of hopeless society angle that he has, and he has these in a lot of movies, but, just even here about that police work is not so much about, being a hero and defending, upholding the law and defending a community, but it's more about, following orders. So that sets up this clear kind of dynamic of, well, there's going to be some bureaucracy here, and this might not be about saving the neighborhood, protecting the neighborhood. Now, I have a question for you, though, Joe. My impression was that he had been a cop for a while, and this was a new assignment. The way they made it sound, this was like his first day on the job, but that couldn't be right because he was a lieutenant, right? So he must have been...
I assume that they meant one of two things. One, that it was, although they never make this clear, that either he was in some other area and was transferred in, or that he had just gotten a promotion, and so this was his first night as something other than a beat cop type of thing.
Right.
But they never make it clear. It's a very specific line of dialogue, but it's never really touched on again. And the only thing I think it's there to do is possibly point out that the situation he's going to be in is going to be something that he's never encountered anything like before, that he is basically very, very new to what he's about to experience. But I agree.
However, I feel like it also suggested that he's been tested, and he's the type of person that would like do the right thing, and that he's now a lieutenant because he did the right thing. Like I didn't get the impression that he was maybe part of a firing squad, like we just saw.
Oh no!
And
no,
somehow got promoted because he followed orders. I feel like we get the idea that he is. He's like a Western. He's sort of the honorable sheriff.
Well, here is the thing too. I as I told you, I'm scrubbing through the movie in the background just to double check that my impressions are correct. There's something very interesting, because you're exactly right. I think not only are we not meant to think that from his demeanor, his actual outfit, his uniform, his entire look is completely alien to every other officer we see in the movie. They're all in dark blues. And he stands out immediately because he's in this kind of earth tony look. So we automatically, even if there was no dialogue, visually, at no point does he look like he belongs with any of the other people that he's with that are officers. They're all in dark colors or helmets.
And did you notice too, we saw where he lived. There was the point to see him get in his car and drive to work. And where he lived, there were trees. It looked like a really nice kind of like suburban neighborhood.
Yes.
And by the time he gets to the precinct, it basically looks like a series of empty lots. Like,
it looks like the kind of classic, what you would associate with late 80s kind of war zone or crime ridden area of a city. That's what it looks like.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So immediately following this, we then get our intro to Napoleon Wilson, who is, if not the most clear template. Yeah, well, that's where the comparisons to Snake Plissken begin, is the first act of both characters is in reference to a cigarette. So, but let me play this, because this is one thing to pay attention to in this movie. If you go into this and you watch it, because this is very important in a key scene later, you will get the impression, not the impression, you are basically shown that this character has an answer and has calculated the answer to everything and everyone he's encountered until a certain point, which I actually will play that clip later. But this is our first intro to this character. So we have a marshal, I guess, who's played by a actor who pops up in a bunch of early Carpenter films. I don't remember his name. I think it's Charles Cypher. And he's basically there to pick up a number of people, including Napoleon Wilson. And this is our intro to him right after the prison doors open. So I will play this clip now.
This is Napoleon Wilson. Got a smoke? Close the door. I want you to know something, Wilson. Now, I don't enjoy driving anybody to death row. You try anything. Anything. I've got 2 guards with shotguns, and I'll blow you apart. Sure could use a smoke. Do you understand me, Wilson? You mumble a little bit. I get the general idea.
Yeah, just a beautiful, I mean, again, you get everything you need on this character inside of about 35 seconds. You got it top to bottom. And again, if this is not where Snake Plissken evolved from, then I'll sell my house, because there's no way.
I was gonna say it was a little harder to pick him out because he wasn't wearing an eye patch and kind of have like leopard print or like leather pants on. But yeah, this is clearly the template for Snake. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I could even believe if I had read somewhere that Carpenter had originally made Escape to be a sequel to this, with Napoleon being the character and then it morphed. That wouldn't shock me at all. So we get the intro to this character. We see him get beat around again to show the two sides. The first cop that talks to him says, look, I'm taking you where you have to go, but I'm not happy to drive anybody to die, which is really important from a law enforcement officer, and then immediately followed by the prison warden basically throwing him on the ground and getting a last kick in on him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, I don't know if you noticed this, but when that warden first walks into the room with the other two prisoners, Wells, the other, the black inmate, will not look at him. He's looking away as if he's been abused. That's an abusive kind of reaction, is to not look him in the eyes. So again, lots of little stuff that's telegraphed inside of this thing.
These men have not been treated well. Yeah.
No. And so we then get a long middle segment, which I'm just scrubbing. Yeah. So then we get to probably one of the most infamous parts of the film, which is, it's a very extended sequence where we see the four individuals who had taken the blood pact in the opening of the film. They are now loaded, including the Romero actor, whose name is Frank Doubleday, is carrying a rifle. And they are randomly going around, and we see some of the people that they're targeting, including what looks like a homeless individual, an older woman, and as far as we know, they don't shoot anybody else. So they do not kill these two characters, who appear to be basically people on the lower end of society, from what we can tell.
Right.
And so they keep.
But is there? I don't know if it's implied. I don't think there's any dialogue. But we're looking at these people through the scope of the rifle, and there's no dialogue. But I almost see there's some type of like, no, not this one.
Yes, well, we see the finger. The finger goes on the trigger for a minute and then comes off. So it's the consideration is shown through the tightening and the loosening of the trigger finger. So you do see that.
And is it implied at all that there's something about like this person doesn't deserve it, or this won't make a big enough splash? Like it's just I don't know. That's what I put on it. But
here's what I read into it. And again, this is purely subjective. I haven't read anything to say this. This is just how I look at it. One of the people in the car has a basically Che Guevara look, like a power of the people type of look.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And it's a multiracial gang, which at this time were not people who were probably cruising at the crest of society.
Right,
so
but it's also all young men, though, too. It's younger men.
Right.
I think that's important. It's younger men.
Younger men in what looks like a rough area of the city, looking at other people who appear to be, I don't remember, the homeless man was black, I think?
He was an older black man.
Yes.
And then it was, like an old black woman who looked like she was coming home from the grocery store. Like she had groceries with her. Yeah.
So I think as much as these individuals were capable of empathy, it is empathy for people who they know are also not being treated well, probably by whatever the power structures of society are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I read into it, and I thought that's what Carpenter was trying to show us there.
Right.
So they weren't interested in those people.
Correct, and that's my read as well. So then, in the middle of that, so that's our setup that these guys are cruising to look to kill somebody. I mean, it's very clear that they're looking to cause some trouble. So we get a long sequence of that. Then we intercut to Bishop showing up at the precinct. And in particular, you see multiple shots of the empty spaces around the precinct, which will come back into play later when the gang members show up. But we see him looking around and observing what the area looks like. And that's when we get the alternate theme of the movie, which if you're familiar with the Escape from New York theme, keep it in the back of your mind as I play this, because to me, there's a little bit of connection here. So I'm going to go ahead and play it.
Yeah. And exactly like you said, simplicity, the spine, like sort of the spine of the theme. I can see, as that music is playing, I can see the lieutenant driving in his car, just kind of seeing the sort of fallow precinct, looking at the empty lots. And, Carpenter will use this theme a lot in some of the more contemplative moments in the movie. And even later on, in between some of the battles, you'll hear this theme come up. And, we'll get into this more, but just this and plus the first theme that we played, that's it. That is the music for the movie. Sometimes it starts in different places. Sometimes it, ends. It gets cut off prematurely. But that is the score for the film.
Yeah, and that's the again, one of the things that is impressive is how little he has to do to make it effective. It doesn't have to be, there are movies with multiple themes for every single character.
Oh yeah.
And you hear constantly different music, which again, this isn't a criticism or saying one version is better or another, but it is to me very impressive when with very little, a lot is accomplished, where, the strength of the visuals and the characters mean that you don't need as much music. You just have to punctuate, as opposed to, being a coupling of the thing because both sides need to be reinforced. No, in this case, the music is doing only what is absolutely necessary for those scenes where it's present.
I couldn't agree more. And like we said before, it allows for dialogue to happen. It allows for other things to be happening on top of it and not be too obtrusive.
So now we get the lieutenant comes into what is actually Precinct 9, because a lot of people point this out, and they're correct. It is not Precinct 13, but they said it sounded cooler on the poster, which makes complete sense. And so he goes
it's District 13, but it's
District
Precinct
13,
9.
Precinct 9, right.
But I guess the building says District 14, though, on it, though, like the actual building in the movie. So,
if you want to nitpick, there's always going to be something. So it's just funny. So he goes in, and his first encounter in the precinct is with a white desk officer who reacts like he doesn't want the guy to, like, if you watch how he puts the pencil down. It's not even just the expression. He just tosses the pencil down and immediately goes into another room. So immediately, again, we are getting a contrast in what we're seeing and how these people treat each other. And so then,
and like you mentioned earlier, he's wearing an all black uniform,
all black outfit. And so then he encounters the two women who are Julie and Lee. And Lee is played by Laurie Zimmer, who famously only did a few films and then decided to just retire from acting because she was happier to be a teacher. And so left acting and became a teacher. There's actually a documentary, you can see it on YouTube, about an actress who worked with her who thought that maybe she had died or something had happened to her. And,
that's great. Yeah. We haven't seen you in any roles. Did you die? No, I'm just a teacher now.
Isn't it crazy? Hey, show business, baby. If you're not in a movie, you're dead. So, it's that. So basically, she's very kind to him, takes him back, says, do you want some coffee? And they have what I think is a very significant little back and forth that tells you, again, in a very small amount of time, a lot about his character. So I'm going to play their interaction right here.
I grew up 4 blocks from here. When I was about 4 or 5, my father sent me in here one day with a note. Detective read it and said, we lock up little boys who can't behave. When he went to call my father, I carved something on the top of his desk with a letter opener. For months, I was afraid he might see it and come after me.
Why did your father send you in here?
For using foul language in the presence of my mother.
What did you carve on the desk? Kind of advanced for a little kid. Your father or somebody obviously got you out of Anderson early enough.
The captain would like to see you now, Lieutenant.
Be right there. Oh, by the way, no one took me out of Anderson when I was a baby. I walked out myself when I was 20.
Enjoy your new police station.
I will. Thanks for the coffee.
Such a beautiful little scene. I love that he does not say what's on the desk. It's just, is that great or what?
That is such a John Carpenter. He does this in all the movies. There's things that we never find out what was said or what was written or what it means by, I remember you in St. Louis, or I remember I saw what you did in Cleveland, talking about Escape from New York and even Escape from LA. So he does that all the time. And I think that draws us in as an audience where we're like, oh, he's going to reveal it. We're going to see, he's going to do a close up of the desk and we're going to get to see what he wrote on the desk. But he doesn't. And we just move on to the next scene. And I think that's a really great way that he kind of just like pulls us in further. And, there's a lot of dialogue later with Napoleon too, where there's some things left unsaid.
I have some. So we get some more interspersed shots where we see that the four men have now decided to target an ice cream vendor. And in the midst of this, which we didn't mention, there is a father and a young girl who are trying to get to, I believe, the babysitter's house or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it is.
It seems weird that, did you get the vibe that the father was romantically involved with the babysitter?
Well, yes.
And the mother was out of the picture?
Yes.
And you're just like, this is not a good look, man.
But also, here's something that it never goes... There's one really interesting aspect of this film that as you're talking about, where you don't know. Right. So there's a point where the little girl says to the father, should we ask a police officer for directions? And he looks very concerned. And my note is, why is the father afraid to ask the cops for directions? Because these are a white family. It's a white father and a white daughter. So, if they were black, you could automatically decide, maybe we don't want to get a cop involved if we don't have to with, being around here. But it's odd that he's so immediately kind of like, I think it's over here, and just kind of goes right by it. So it's
and that's
weird.
the subtlety. That's the subtlety we're talking about, where it just appears to be, a pulp kind of, gritty film, and there's just all this other subcontext that is just being left out, but is being implied, or we're picking up on. Right. That just takes it to this other level. Now, let me. So we assume, like, I thought it was because he's like, I didn't know if the mother was still in the picture, or if the mother had died and he was having this relationship, and that was his sketchiness, or that was his kind of, you didn't trust him. But I think also maybe it just made the point too that it's like, who are these cops in this scenario in John Carpenter's movies? Who are the cops serving? We watched at the start. We watched them gun down, in an unlawful way. We watched them, gun down people. We've now seen two scenes where, like you said, when our lead character goes into the precinct 13 or 14 or 9, goes in. Not only is the desk sergeant not happy to see him, but then when he talks to the captain, the captain is clearly not a fan of people of color or anybody else that's not white. And
we should point out, I forgot one element. He locks the shotgun up in a precinct in the middle of a not great area. He locks the weaponry up for the guy watching the precinct.
Yeah.
And there's a lot in there.
It's so rich, and you just know the actors that he picked and the characters he picked, they have this scowl on their face when they see Lieutenant Bishop, and I think that's, you just then are like, oh, okay, this is the racism. But going back to the father, even the father, whether he's a criminal or not, it seems to have a lack of trust for the police as well. So I think once again we're being signaled by John Carpenter that the police in this movie or in this world that he's created are very different than maybe some of the classic tropes of sort of serve and protect. And I think, so either the guy's just like a really rotten guy, or there is just this general mistrust. And then there's even the scene about where her school teacher, the young girl, talks about her school teacher saying, we should reach out and ask for help. And he mentioned something about her being like liberal or whatever. And it just felt, by the way, that felt like a tweet from 2 days ago, read where somebody was saying, these people who never step outside of the classroom need to, So I was just like, man, what year is this, film?
Right.
And it, like you said, it was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Can I say something real quick though?
Absolutely.
About the
say whatever
girl?
you want.
Can I say something about the little girl? So you know how there's plot armor in a movie where we know a character can't die because there's plot armor. Okay, this girl has the opposite of that. The second I saw this precious young girl on the screen, I was like, "Oh my God, they're gonna kill this girl. They're gonna kill this poor girl."
Yeah.
And I just knew it. And like I don't know on your first watching what your impression was, but I don't know if there's a term for that, like whatever it is. But it's the opposite of plot armor. I was like, "Oh my God, this is not gonna end well for this young girl."
Yeah. Okay, let's put it this way: in a film where I didn't know who was directing it, I might not have guessed what was going to happen, although it's definitely, but you are definitely led that by the fact that these guys, but I guarantee you in most films, the father would have been shot, not the daughter. What would have happened for a director who wasn't as cynical and bitter and mean as John Carpenter was, the father would get killed protecting the daughter. That's what would happen. They'd go to aim at her. Dad jumps in front. He gets clipped and goes down. And then, that's what would happen. But
but that wouldn't have worked in this scenario because then they wouldn't have pursued the girl into the precinct, would they?
Correct. No. Well, what would have happened there is the ice cream truck guy would have grabbed her, and he would have ended up at the precinct with her. That's how it would have worked in a conventional film.
So some way, in a conventional way, Hey, by the way, can I ask another question, another clarifying question?
Absolutely.
So you're about to talk about now, probably, I'm assuming, the scene with the Frosty truck driver or ice cream truck driver. And here's the thing. So we see the four men who were previously driving around, four gang members who were driving around picking people to shoot or deciding who to shoot.
Ne'er-do-wells, as they would say.
Ne'er-do-wells, yes. Yes. So they're driving around, and it's never explained. There's no dialogue that says why they're basically shadowing an ice cream truck driver. Like they don't, like there's no dialogue that says, hey, let's follow this guy because so I don't know why.
To me,
it's horrifying when you think about it.
It's because he looked at them. I think that's why.
Oh,
I think because he looked at them. And I think that I wonder if the whole thing was the first person who looks at us is dead. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
You hear the stories about like if
flashing the lights,
flash the lights.
Yeah,
then
I've heard that one a million
all
times.
Those urban legends,
thing.
Right?
Yeah.
So that was it. Just because he looked at them.
That's the only. I mean, I scrubbed through it, and the only thing that happens is he looks at them. So the only other angle would be because.
Yeah.
If there were other kids around, they shot the kids. You'd be like, okay, they're just going after kids, but they don't. At least not like that. Let's put it that way. So I think it's just because he's the first person who looked at them who did not look like somebody they empathized with. What little 4% empathy they have was not for that guy. And
he looked back.
He looked at him.
Just like you said, he looked back. Those other characters that we see in the crosshairs are just so embroiled in their day to day. They don't even look at them. Don't notice them.
Yep. So we're going to get to that scene, but there is a bus scene because we just talked about cops who were the mean cops or the disrespectful cops or the racist cops, however you want to read it.
Good cop, bad cop. Good cop, bad cop.
Yeah. And here then we immediately get another scene that shows a cop that is at least somewhat humanistic towards a death row prisoner. Yeah. So I'm going to play the scene from the bus because it's also a great Napoleon Wilson scene. So let's play this.
There's so many.
There are so many.
You don't mind if I sit down a minute or two, do you, Wilson?
Got a smoke on you?
You asked me before.
Well, I never got a definite answer.
I don't smoke.
That's a definite answer. Another one gone. When you're in my position, days are like women. Each one is so goddamn precious. They always end up leaving you. What do you want?
Why, do I have to want something?
You're a cop. You're either curious about me, or you want to give me some shit.
I don't understand you, Wilson.
Curious.
You're not a psychopath. You're not stupid.
I am an asshole. Can't take everything away from me.
Why did you kill those men?
Everybody asks me the same question. I always tell them the same thing. First time I ever saw a preacher, he said to me, son, there's something strange about you. You got something to do with death. Being real young, I believed him. Turned out he was right.
Look at
That's no answer.
I thought it was pretty good.
Where'd you get a name like Napoleon?
I'll tell you sometime.
When?
The moment of dying.
Right. So we get, again, a wonderful back and forth where obviously he's heard this question a million times. He's got the answer down pat and isn't going to tell him anything because he's just another cop who's curious or wants to give him shit. Again, going back to his treatment probably in multiple prisons and throughout life.
Right. And the defense mechanism. And then just once again, it's like he got bad advice from an authority figure. So, you know, if the police are the authority and they're abusing their power, here he is. He talked to somebody of, you know, a faith or of a church, and that person kind of from day one said, you're not one of the good ones, you know? And so it's like this overwhelming theme about how in these movies, you know, so there's like a group in society that is mistreated, is not being advised, and is really being just let down by the powers that be. And, you know, in this movie, it's a gang of criminals that their only real commonality is that they all have kind of been put into this sort of area of society, and they are young men.
Right. So then we get the infamous scene of the film that most people would have at least heard about it from, which is where we go back to the father and daughter still lost, and she sees the ice cream truck. And at this point, some time has passed, and the ice cream truck driver now knows he is being hunted because when the little girl says to her dad, I'm going to get ice cream while he's on the phone. Right. This is such a well-shot scene, too. I love the way this whole scene is set up. So he's in a phone booth. I know nobody knows what those are anymore, but it's a phone booth with a door.
What's that?
Yeah, exactly. So the daughter goes up and she says that she wants ice cream, and the ice cream guy checks for the car, doesn't see it, and goes to get her ice cream. And then when he goes back and sits down, suddenly the Romero guy, who has no name, I don't think even in this movie, walks up next to him, and immediately they pull him out of the car. The little girl is walking away with her ice cream cone, and they are basically torturing the guy. They're putting the gun in his mouth. They're kind of messing with him. And then the little girl comes back and says, "Oh, I was supposed to have twist ice cream." At which point,
and it was just vanilla. It was just vanilla.
Yeah,
I would have been outraged.
Right? Yes. The reason enough to get killed because he immediately, with the most cold movement ever, just swings the pistol over and shoots her dead in the chest. And you see it. I mean, there's no real gore to it. It's obviously a paintball, but the suddenness and the brutality of it are unbelievable.
But what makes it brutal? What makes it brutal is not that it's this quick or visceral motion. It's that he does it like he's tying his shoe. He just turns the gun on her, boom, hits her, and then he just goes boom, boom, boom into the ice cream truck driver, shoots him in the back while he's on the ground. Like he was brushing his teeth. Yep. Like even less effort than that. Like he was just raising his arm and lowering it. And it's just so violent in that way because he's just doing it so naturally and so matter of fact.
And also, I think that it looks like, because I just rewatched it a couple times, I have a feeling they just shot her with a paintball. So her expression is probably genuine, kind of like, ow, which is perfect because it's just this shocked look. And she goes down. And then the father, when he sees her, like the reactions in this whole thing they're so well done. I mean, the acting is fantastic. All of it, top to bottom, is just, this is why this is the centerpiece thing. If it was just silly or funny or over the top, you probably wouldn't care. But the fact that this feels like a real scene that could have happened is, I think, what gives it its power. And it's unbelievable to watch it, even now, to watch it.
Well, even the father, the way he reacts, it's not like this, scene chewing, like, no, or like, like, why God? He turns almost like feral. Like he stops, he's just grunting and he's kind of, and then after that, I don't think before that, he has this kind of schemer kind of dialogue where you can tell he's kind of like talking and manipulating people through his speech. It sounds like he's trying to do something with the maid or whatever, the babysitter. And and then after that scene, he's just grunting, making sounds, and just sort of letting his rage sort of pilot him.
Yeah, so he grabs a gun that as the ice cream guy's dying, he says there's a gun under the dash, and then basically we have kind of an intercut chase sequence where he's chasing after the guys, and at the same time, one of the inmates on the bus is sick enough that they pull off to the precinct, which of course is closed down, and the lieutenant tries to tell them, hey, maybe don't stay here, but they kind of force the issue, and they say, we're just going to use your holding tanks, which of course we know where this is going. And it leads to a very brief but excellent scene where Bishop meets Napoleon for the first time. Now I'm going to play the audio. You're not going to see what I'm going to talk about, but I'll mention it. So I'm going to play it. It's only 12 seconds, but notice how Wilson responds after Bishop tells him he doesn't have a cigarette, and importantly says he's sorry about it. Listen to the difference in his response.
Got a smoke?
No. Sorry.
Well, you see one floating around. Snag it for me, will you?
And what's really significant if you watch the scene is Wilson has this angle of his head, which is, yep, same old shit, same old shit. And when he says sorry, Wilson's head straightens up and he looks at him completely differently. And then he almost doesn't stammer, but at no point have you heard him go, well, he doesn't, there's no hesitation in any of his other answers. And here we see, oh, wait, I have to reformulate the answer because somebody's treating me like a human being that's wearing a uniform. I don't know what to make of this.
And he's the first one to answer the question, right?
Oh, yes, with a definitive answer up front. Yep.
Yeah, the other previous cops, I think the one said, I don't smoke or whatever, but that still wasn't the answer to the question. Do you have a cigarette? And he was the first one to say, no, I don't. Sorry. Like, just straight up answer the question. Like all the other, all the other conversations, it's just been people not answering, blowing it off and being like, why did you kill those people? Or like, I want to, so I think that's interesting too. I wonder though, if at that moment too, what Napoleon is thinking. Does he think that, oh, wow, somebody who's actually nice, or is this, can I take advantage of this situation? I don't know. I don't know at that point.
Well, I didn't capture the clip, but there is a part later where he mentions the fact that he saved his life twice, but he wrote off the first time as being an accident or something. But then when he does it again, it means something. So I think what at least what I read in that is, okay, this is not the standard issue cop I've seen before. I don't know what this is, but I might not just want to cut this guy's throat and leave him bleeding in the ditch if things go south, which he doesn't. I mean, he has a shotgun at one point, because what proceeds from here is the mayhem of the assault on the precinct, the titular assault on Precinct 13, where the father arrives at the precinct unable to speak, and really does not speak at all until the end of the film, where he mouths something, but that's it. And then they don't think there's anybody chasing him. And then one of the cops, the desk guy, goes out, gets shot and falls down. And at which point we get an extended sequence where the place is shut up and they realize, oh, we are surrounded by, we don't even know how many people. And the whole place gets blown apart for 20 minutes or so, something like that.
And I love how preceding that scene, there's not some like huge villain dialogue where like the lead member, the Che Guevara, I was like, oh, he's going to take over the lead and be like, cops were assaulting the precinct or whatever. They basically just like show up with some blood, throw some blood on the ground, throw this flag on the ground that has blood all over it, and basically that means it's on. That is which is so much more brutal than if they said, hey, we have a blood oath to
no negotiation, no, there's nothing. It's just, nope, you're dead now. That's it. And so we get this long extended sequence where Bishop keeps saying, somebody's going to hear it. Somebody's going to hear it. Somebody will know something's happening. And Wilson keeps telling him, well, yeah, but look where we are. And yeah, they heard something, but look at the street. They've kept all the bodies off the street. They've kept all the cars off the street. And so there's a long segment of time where they finally get to the grips with the fact that nobody is coming to rescue them, that they're going to have to try to do something. They fend off an attack, which is where basically Bishop lets the prisoners out. And then there's a point where somebody mentions what the flag said to Wells, the black prisoner, who says, oh, man, I know what these guys are. These people are basically, they're essentially suicide bombers for all intents and purposes. Yeah. They are not afraid to die. They're going to come in here, and their only goal is to kill you. And if you kill them, so what? And so then they formulate the first plan, which is to try to have to have somebody go out through a manhole cover. And I'm jumping over a lot, Doug, if you want to cut in. But basically, this is just a long, extended shootout and then response. There's a great scene where they're just blowing people away over and over and over.
Yeah, and prior to this, how much violence there was there? Because I'm thinking, so you really had the scene with the young girl.
That's
and
it.
And then you had the scene at the start where the men were gunned down. But prior to this, there was flashes of real extreme violence, but not prolonged violence. So like you said, there's 20 minutes of just basically dudes flooding in the windows or shooting. First they're shooting in the windows, then they're flooding in the windows, and they're able to sort of stave them off. And there's it's very graphic. It's not just you hear a gunshot and somebody falls over like in a Western or something like that. There's blood packets, there's gore.
Although still mostly faceless. Outside of our protagonist, you really don't see any of the gang members except the guy who throws the flag down, who we had seen earlier. So that wasn't really a new character.
Which is worse. I think that's the connection to the Night of the Living Dead. That these are just these young men are not. They're a gang, but they're kind of like faceless zombies of this gang. Yeah.
Right. So we get to a point where they're essentially basically out of ammo. And what they're doing is waiting for the next attack cycle. And they know at that point they're probably done because there's no ammo. So they come up with a plan, which has a wonderful little character moment for Wells, which I'm going to play here just because, again, there's all these little dialogue scenes are just so powerful because they're in between long stretches of just either music or just visuals. And then we get this sequence with Wells, and basically they're trying to decide who's going to go out.
Looks pretty good to me.
Looks like hell. It's all we got.
Who goes? I gotta tell you, I don't know how to hotwire a car. I'm a cop.
Between me and Snow White.
Shit! Shit!
What's wrong? We haven't flipped a coin yet.
I'm gonna lose.
You got a bad attitude, Wells.
I always lose. I had bad luck all my life. Now, how do you think I ended up in here?
Maybe it'll change.
It might. If we don't flip a coin. Let's do something else.
What?
Potatoes.
Hot potatoes.
It's the craziest thing.
One day, 2 day, 3 day, 4, 5 day, 6 day, 7 day, more.
This is on who will go out and face a gang of bloodthirsty murderers.
Yeah.
I told you I'd
It's
like we're gonna do it again.
Hey, there isn't time.
This might be my favorite dialogue from Wells.
Well, how come she's out of it?
All right, if I can do it with one arm.
Still no sign of them. Let's get moving.
You want me to show you where it is?
I'll take him down. You stay up here.
Here we go.
It's right next to the furnace. You can't
Not
miss
this,
it.
sorry. Now it's coming.
Nobody gonna wish me luck?
Good luck.
Look at that. 2 cops wishing me luck. I'm doomed.
I mean, just beautiful. And at this point, basically, they are working as a unit. Now you have police, law enforcement of individuals, and I mean, I don't know what Wells did, but certainly Napoleon is a multiple murderer, and they are working as a unit because they're all screwed.
Did you assume, though, they're all going to death row? That the reason they're all being transported is that they've all done something?
It would make sense because why else would it just be 3 people on a bus? If it was just a regular prison transport, the only thing is I don't think Wells was as chained up as Napoleon Wilson was. And that might just because he's more brutal and killed more people. That could be as simple as it is. Or was, more of a headache in prison because clearly he has a bit of a tongue on him. So that could be what it is.
Hey, can I ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
And I don't remember this. What happened to the 3rd inmate that was sick?
I assume he died in the assault. I think he probably got shot because he couldn't move. Because the girl, Julie, who's the phone operator, gets killed. And I don't know if we ever actually see it, but I don't know why he wouldn't have gone down because he couldn't really move.
Oh, I think at some point the sort of good marshal who's ferrying Wilson and the other inmates, at some point he says, "Forget it, we're out of here." and he tries to get all the
oh yeah, that's right. He gets killed
back
there
on the bus.
Yes,
and
yes.
that's
you're
when
right.
I think you have like 3 or 4 officers get shot. Like that is kind of the at that point. Then all you have left is Wells, Napoleon,
Right. Yes.
Lee, and Bishop.
And that's it. You're right. So yes. So Wells attempts to escape and is he gets to the car, which is what they were trying to get to, and and there's great little dialogue with him and Wilson when Wilson's like, "Don't run off," and he's like, "Well," he says, "I'll tell somebody about it, but then I'm gone." He's like, "All right, good luck," and then he gets killed. Unsurprisingly, somebody's in the car and kills him. And so then basically now it's down to the 3 of them, and the idea is, okay, they're going to come in here. We can't stop them. Let's go down to the basement and let's try to hold them off, and we'll have a last stand down there. And I'm going to play another sensational bit of dialogue where, again, it's just Napoleon Wilson. It's just such great dialogue, and I got to play another clip. So this is the last stand clip.
We can make one last stand. Take that sign, put it down the end of the hallway. It'll help us stand them off.
What have you used to hold him back with?
Anything we can find. Still have the gun?
2 shots. Do I save it for the 2 of us?
You save them for the first 2 assholes who come through that vent. They're bound to have seen Wells come up out of the manhole.
What do I use on the rest of them that come climbing through?
Then you'll have to wing it.
None of us know who he is, what happened to him, or what he's done. He could be anybody or anything. I'm curious about one thing.
Just one?
No, there are other things. But at the moment, this one interests me the most.
What's that?
Why don't you climb through that vent and take off down the sewer in the other direction?
Well, there are 2 things a man should never run from, even if they cost him his life. One is a man who's helpless and can't run with you.
What's the other?
Come here a minute, Wilson.
The very least of our problems is we've run out of time.
It's an old story with me. I was born out of time.
That is such a wonderful scene. And number one, it sounds like a Western, top to bottom. If you put a cowboy hat on him, you know what I mean?
I was going to say Rio Bravo, like, you know, the Duke, you know, John Wayne defending. So there's the plot is the same idea where basically he has to hold this wealthy, it's the son, a wealthy ranch owner's son is basically in the prison or at the, you know, the jailhouse, and he has to fend off this gang that's basically trying to take this young man away. And at the end of the day, the young man he's just like not a very good person, and the wealthy, you know, ranch owner has spoiled his son, so he's just like not a good person. So it's almost like why is the lead character even why is he doing the right thing? Because this person's not even really that, you know, noble. Why is he risking his life and facing this? And I think that that's the Rio Bravo right there. That scene.
Well, you can even do the John Wayne twang. 2 things a man should never run from. Even if it costs him his life. Like you can hear it, and plus that little bit about don't leave somebody behind who can't help themselves. This is not the dialogue I expect from a cold-blooded murderer.
Yeah,
it's just not.
That part I like didn't believe a little bit because I'm just like, But what I really did like about that is the second thing. We don't know what he's talking. We don't know what the second thing is.
No, but he's looking at a beautiful woman.
We know.
So
we know.
But
We know.
I take that as the fact that probably he had a good reason for killing those guys. That, you know, the reason he never talks about it. Maybe not.
Right.
Maybe not.
But okay. But see, that's the whole game we're playing. And even when even when Lee says, we don't know who this guy is that we're protecting.
Yes.
So we don't even know. And like you brought up earlier, he was avoiding the cops. This is the father now that they're talking about. And so the father was avoiding the cops. So we don't even know, you know, did this guy, like, did he embezzle
take
money
his daughter
from Wall
away
Street?
from his wife?
Right.
So there again, we're playing with, okay, we don't know anything about the guy. We assume because he has a daughter and because he looks like somebody who's a good person because, you know, he's in a car and he's driving and he's got a daughter, that he's somehow a good person.
And he's
white.
He's white,
Yep.
and he's well dressed, and he's in a nice car in a
Yep.
bad neighborhood.
Right.
So we're making a lot of assumptions. We are.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But we're supposed to
he
think
could
Wilson
have-
is a
by the way,
scumbag, and
he could have kidnapped the girl, and
Sure.
they have some weird, sick thing where
Who knows?
You
Absolutely.
don't know. You
Right.
don't know. I mean,
And
she
that's
does call
why-
him father, but
yeah,
you
don't know anything, man. You don't know
You
anything.
don't know.
But
You
that's
don't.
why Wilson's line, I think, I like to try to believe it's true because it's a contrast. It's saying, you're making assumptions based on these things that you think you know, but you really don't. And we never find out. We never do find out why he killed the guys. And so they have their last stand, and basically the idea is they're holding him off with this giant sign. And Jaws style, the lieutenant has to shoot a propane tank or something and blow it up. And of course, the last shot, he managed to do it. It blows up. And right then, the cops happen to show up. So thanks, other cops.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. Great timing. Yeah. And there are some scenes before that where they show the cops kind of like fumbling their way to the crime scene, you know, like finding the precinct. You know.
Well, interestingly, with that scene, they keep asking for backup and they keep being told there is none. They're like, and they're pissed off because they're trying to figure out what's going on and they have no help. So again, we're getting different sides
bureaucracy.
Yep.
The
Same
bureaucracy of they're not doing the right things, and the people who are doing the right things are not getting the support they need to do them.
Right. And so they managed to hold off the horde. I guess they killed enough that the rest ran, or they're all dead. And then we basically come down to where Lee goes up the stairs to get medical assistance, and then an officer shows up to take Wilson back into custody, and we get a wonderful scene, and this will be my last clip for this movie. I'm going to play this now.
Get away from him!
And that is Bishop pushing an officer away from Wilson when he's trying to handcuff him.
It would be a privilege if you'd walk outside with me.
I know I would.
You're pretty fancy, Wilson.
I have moments.
And we got the music swelling up, and then we have the title as the two of them walk out. But that scene is great because, you know, basically Bishop has this, and it's interesting, after he shoves the officer away, he has this moment where he realizes, okay, I lost control for a minute. But then basically this is, and I've seen scenes like this in many other movies where it's like he has at least respect for him. Like he's going back into custody. This is not going to be where he frees him. I have no illusions about that.
And that would have been, if he would have been like, hey, sneak out the back or something,
Right.
you know, like,
But he realizes that this is not just some nothing. And I think at the beginning he knew that too. He immediately recognized he was a human being. Hence his response of no sorry. Why say sorry to somebody that's dehumanized to you? You don't even bother. They don't count.
But see, even Wells' character is, you're like, oh, he's the bad guy, like Wells. But even Wells, you know, who's supposed to be like who thinks about, you know, basically leaving them all behind, or at the first opportunity he's going to be a coward and flee. Even he is a dynamic character because he talks about like the reason he's in this position is he just has this bad luck. And that he's not going to get a fair shake. He never gets a fair shake because of his bad luck. And he could have been a very one-dimensional character and just been like the bad guy. And then, you know, Bishop is like the one who still has a moral compass, you know, that type of thing. But it was so more nuanced than that. And I think that just made even then Bishop more interesting, and obviously Napoleon interesting as well. Once again, though, I do want to point out, like you've pointed out, the two cops who show up at the end to rescue us, they're all dressed in that darker black uniform as well. Yeah.
And that, I believe, is the end of my notes on it because I mean, it's funny. It's just a bit of a preface. Doug was thinking, he's like, you know, maybe we should make sure we don't talk too long about these movies because we might not have anything to say. And I said, oh yeah, sure. We'll keep a timer running. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, there's no fucking way we're not going to have a lot to say about these movies.
Yes. Yeah.
And sure enough, we've spent an hour plus on just the first
Absolutely.
movie.
And I think maybe we should do that then. For right now, I think we should like do this movie as like kind of a separate scene. And I know maybe we move more quickly through the others, but because there's so much more I could say about Escape from New York as well. So
yeah.
But maybe we could wrap it up there.
Well, I was going to say we can do another episode, and I can just attach it to this. It doesn't mean we have to record it at once, but
Right.
I want to respect Doug's time because he has to be up and teach in the morning, and I don't. So and,
well, it's also we've also gone for almost 90 minutes. So I feel like the audience would just be like, oh man.
Well,
but
I think the audience that keys into this could listen to this for 3 hours. However, I understand that there is a limit, but this is the thing. This is the other reason I knew this would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Escape from New York, we might have less to say overall, and that's fine. Because this movie is, as I said, I think the reason I wanted to talk so long and so much about this is I feel like it's not seen enough, and it is a magnificent movie that's worth seeing. So yes, Escape from New York's excellent as well, but that's the one everybody, of this period, most people will know the Escape from New York. They're not going to necessarily, I've heard of Assault, but that's just the one where the cops are getting shot. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Describing it sounds very lightweight, but it is anything but lightweight. And so that's why I was like, we're going to talk about this for a while, and that's fine. Yeah. So we can basically separate this into separate recordings, and that's no problem. And I can bolt them together.
What's your just like before, like to kind of wrap it up here?
Sure.
What is your takeaway from this movie? I mean, you just said it's kind of an underrepresented film, or it's like a missed film, like people are aware of it. But what's sort of your takeaway of like what was John Carpenter trying to do in this movie, or what was your takeaway from it?
Well, I of course I'm speculating and guessing and going into somebody else's head, which I can't tell you what he actually is thinking. But this feels like a very deliberate exploration of the gray areas of people and characters, because that is also a classic of a lot of Westerns, is the gray area. Yes, there are the very black and white, good and bad characters, but a lot of the best Westerns play around with different morality and or circumventing what you think you're seeing. There was a movie, which of course I can't remember. I think it's one of Jack Nicholson's first Westerns, where you think you know what's going on for a lot of the movie, and then you find out there's a whole separate thing that you just didn't infer because the character was a woman, and women at that time were treated a certain way and looked at a certain way. And there's this whole depth to it that goes beyond that. I think it's called The Shooting, maybe. I think that's what it's called. But it's Jack Nicholson's very early role where he's playing a hired gun. But this feels like Carpenter saying, you look at certain people in society and you assume things good and bad, and it's not always that way. And often it is both, because these aren't archetypes. They aren't cartoons. They are human beings with flaws and nobility that may be in contrast to where they are in life and what they do in life. That's my read of it.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I feel like it's about the gray areas. I think with the Western, it's easier because there's this archetype, or there's this trope of like the good sheriff who protects the town, right? And he does what's right because he's the law. And in this scenario, it's kind of really gray because you have basically no help. You're at a station that no one, we have our sheriff archetype in Bishop, but he's cut off and he doesn't get help, and even some of his own police don't appreciate him and support him and are straight up don't like him because he's black because of the color of his skin. So there's a lot more nuance in that. But one of the other things I took away, and I'll finish with this, but there's just this like hopeless society sort of trope, and we're going to see it again in the next movies we look at, and especially in Escape from New York. But this idea of there's this like wasted youth that gets kind of churned up in this sort of wheel of society. And, in this case, it's corrupt cops, bad cops, and it's also bureaucracy. And it's also socioeconomic, that they're just living in this neighborhood. Even Lee at the start of the movie says to Bishop, "Oh, well, did your daddy get you out of this bad place, Anderson? Did he get you out? You're lucky to have somebody get you out of this horrible situation." And he said, No. I got myself out. I grew to be a man and got myself out. And now, of course, he's back and he's in it. But I think there's this strong, like, the neighborhood you're from sort of defines who you are. Like if the pastor says or the priest says you're not a good person, you're not like the other ones, like to Napoleon. So I think there's this youth that gets kind of bad advice, bad takes, and get kind of wrapped up in that sort of wheel of society.
And also the thing about the good sheriff, I think that had this been a white officer, this movie doesn't work. I think that because in many ways, Bishop's persona is the good sheriff, but because of his background, because of his skin color, and because of his empathetic reactions to everyone, that's what expands him past it. But in essence, he is the good sheriff. I mean, he always acts nobly. He doesn't do anything that makes us question his goodness, anything like that. But instead it is his interactions with others that make him a bigger character and show, yeah, you know what, this, and honestly, it's what it is. He puts a murderer and the best cop you've ever seen, basically, in a situation together, and they work together. And,
one other last thing that I wonder if Napoleon was also supposed to be black. I wonder if there was supposed to be this concept that the lieutenant Bishop was black and then Napoleon was as well. But I wonder if Lee's character was supposed to be sort of the, kind of 70s, kind of girl next door kind of beauty and be white. And I wondered if that was maybe in one of the drafts, that there would be this romantic connection between them. There would be this very strong connection between Lee and Napoleon. And even that in itself would be sort of against, a social norm in the 70s.
Well, I felt like there was an attraction that was shown between her and Bishop and Napoleon, that that there were aspects of both that spoke to her. But also, one other thing we didn't even mention that I just thought of is she's a woman in a man's world in the 70s. So clearly she would automatically look at both of them and see, okay,
and by the way, real quick, how many times did Lee, quote unquote, get hysterical or get emotional?
Right.
She's the only one that got shot. She got shot and
gunned people down with one arm.
Yes, continued to be an active member of the siege team or the anti-siege team, even being shot in the arm. So clearly, just the roles in this movie about how, and there's the second secretary, right? And she dies early on. And she gets shaken at some point. She is hysterical, and Bishop kind of has to shake her to be like, calm down, but not Lee, not that character. So even Lee sort of goes beyond the stereotypes of, not just what neighborhood you came from or what socioeconomic class you're from, but also, are you a man or a woman?
Right. So on that note, as we approach the 2-hour mark.
So 30 minutes tops.
30 minutes. Yeah, that's tops. You give me a warning at 30 minutes, Doug, and I'll make sure we stop the show because we'll have nothing left to say at that point. Do it. Yeah. So what we're going to do is, we'll break. I'll put them together because I think they do work as a single show, but we'll take a break here.
We should do like intermission music so that people can go use the restroom or something.
Oh, I'll do that. Point. I will. Yeah. I'll put intermission music. Let's all go to the wait, what's it? Let's all go. It says what?
I think it's let's all go to the. Yeah. I think it's let's all go to the bathroom. I think no.
It might be let's all go to the men's room. I think from its time period.
Well, it was written in like the 40s or 50s, right?
So we'll break here and we'll come back and do Escape from New York in the next segment after the little intermission. But if you've never seen Assault from Precinct 13, the only other thing I will look up very quickly is it streaming anywhere?
It is.
Not that it isn't worth a rental.
You can watch it on Prime with commercials if you want, or you can just rent it. I think it's for HD. It's like $2.99 or $3.99. So have at it. It's great. It's worth
for $3.
$4. Yeah,
it's well worth it. Yeah, it's well worth it. And as another reminder, I will. We'll do this at the next segment too. But Doug has an album coming out October 27th. Okay, at least I remember that, which is called Music for Billionaires. You can pre-order now, which I've already done. And we'll be back for Assault on New York. Nope, not well, sort of, but no, we'll be back.
Kind of
is.
It's true.
We'll come back and we'll do Escape from New York. And this was a blast, Doug. This is exactly what I thought it was going to be. And we're going to come back and do some more Carpenter. So
all right,
awesome. All right, everybody, let's all go to the bathroom.
The men's room.
The men's room.
Show starts in 1 minute.
Like you crave that corn when it's freshly bobbed, you gotta beat it to the box with the butter on the top. Get with it, man. Start strolling down to the sweets that you're rolling, the best in town. Our candy's real gone, if I'm understood. To all you squares, that means the confection is positively delicious. Cork that stuff. Give me 5. Let me send you into this nutty jive. Go, man, go. It ain't very far. Shake it on down to this cool snack bar. Come on, Jill. Give us a treat. A friendly pepper-upper with a tasty beat.
Drink Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper, 'cause it never lets you down.
Frosty, man, frosty.
All right, everybody, welcome back from that trip to the counter. I hope your Dr. Pepper was nice and refreshing. A soft drink I haven't had in probably 10 to 15 years because I don't drink soda much anymore, but I remember it tasting good.
I think we should make a correction, right? That the original song we were thinking of was not actually "Let's Go to the Men's Room." It was "Let's Go to the Lobby." Let's go out to the lobby and get ourselves a snack.
Right.
So,
yeah. So I was in a rare case of injecting sexism where there was not any at the time. That's something.
I was right there with
often.
you. I was like, it's the 40s or 50s. Of course, I mean, the whole thing was misogynistic.
Yeah,
so
the Mandela effect of
popcorn
sexism. We're right there. So. I want to mention again at the top here that Doug's album is coming out October 27th. You can pre-order it now. Music for Billionaires over at, it's on Bandcamp. I have the link at the opening of the video, so you can just follow that address that's there.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's jump into, as I promised at the top, our second film is going to be 1981's Escape from New York, which, as I think I said at the top, is probably the movie that most people of this time period, the early, it's like Halloween, right to Escape from New York. They usually skip over Assault from Precinct 13. And, kind of made Kurt Russell into a huge name when I think previously they'd only really worked on Elvis. And before that, he had been known for mostly, I think, like children or kids programming when he was younger. And this really was a changing role for him. So do you want to do a basic overview of Escape from New York?
Yeah, let's talk about it. So this is Escape from New York. It's a 1981 American science fiction action film. It was co-written, co-scored, and directed by John Carpenter. As you mentioned, it stars Kurt Russell, Lee Van Cleef, Ernest Borgnine. So, wow, that's such a random person to be in this movie. Donald Pleasance, which, if you know Halloween, you know who that is, and the one and only Isaac Hayes, Hot Buttered Soul, and of course Andrea Barbeau. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Adrienne Barbeau, I believe, is correct. Yep.
Yeah, and that actually she was married to John Carpenter, I think, for a short period of time, sometime in the late 70s and maybe throughout this time. And then, of course, the one and only Harry Dean Stanton, who you may know from probably one of my favorite films, Alien, of course, the original Alien.
Sure.
In his kind of role as the kind of fellow sort of crew member. Is he IT or he was part of the kind of maintenance class on the ship?
He was one of the maintenance duo. That's correct.
Yeah.
The guy who looks up and sees something awfully nasty.
Yes, he did. It does not go well for him in his career there on the Nostromo. That's for sure.
Yeah, he did not have to worry about collecting his bonus. Sorry.
Yes, he did not collect his bonus. No. So just to talk real quickly, the film storyline, it's set in the near future world of 1997. Okay, obviously this never came to pass, but it concerns a crime-ridden United States, which has converted Manhattan Island into New York, Manhattan Island in New York City into the country's sole maximum security prison. So we'll get into some of the other parts about the plot, and we'll talk more about it. It was released on July 10th in 1981. The film received positive reviews from critics and was a commercial success, grossing more than $25.2 million. we can do the inflation calculator here, but I think it's also important to note that the cost of the film and the production was only $6 million. So quite a shoestring budget for what we actually see in the film and all the sort of special effects as well as just the practical effects that we see within the movie, and to have grossed that much, quite a success. The film was nominated for four Saturn Awards for Best Science Fiction Film and Best Direction. The film became a cult classic and was followed by a sequel, which we might talk a little bit about tonight, but Escape from L.A. in 1996, which was also directed and written by Carpenter and starred none other than Kurt Russell.
Kurt Russell wearing the exact same clothing he did from the original because he could still fit into it.
Yeah, that's great. That's cardio. That's the stay up on the cardio.
I'm telling you, man, it works for him because to be able to, because that movie was, you said it was 96, so that would be 15 years later. That's pretty good.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah, especially when we think about like William Shatner or some of these other actors that may have not, aged as gracefully, or of course with like William Shatner it was like 40 years or something like that. So age will catch up with you. Definitely.
It does. Yeah, this is it's interesting that this movie, because I've always sort of been amused by the fact that it's considered a cult classic, because cult classics usually fail when they come out, and Escape from New York is definitely not a failure. So I feel like that was a tacked on thing, because when you make over almost 4 times your budget, this is not Rocky Horror Picture Show material, guys. This is now a big movie. So
I think what makes it a cult classic is that I don't think it's a movie that everyone, today, if you were to talk about it, I think probably most people would know the movie Halloween. I feel like if you mention the movie Halloween, people would have some point of reference for that. They might even know Jamie Lee Curtis. They might know that she appeared in it. But I feel like this film is well known, but also to a very specific group. If you are a big fan of Alien and you were growing up in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, I feel like you knew about this film. But as far as it being sort of a widely known, I don't think it is.
That's a fair statement, because as we pointed out, I don't know that Carpenter is as well known. So now perhaps it has become a cult classic after its initial success, which is a strange journey, but that does make sense to me. So you're right. In that way, I think it became a cult classic after being initially in its time very popular.
And just going back to, how like earlier in the episode, I made like what I feel like is a really bad take, being like, oh, I didn't really think of Carpenter as like a horror, like a master of horror, which is just like the stupidest thing to say. But I think it's because I really latch on to movies like Escape from New York and Assault on Precinct 13. And some of the other ones that we'll actually talk about in future episodes, which maybe aren't so traditionally a horror. But I would also like to post a correction that, yes, definitely Carpenter is a master of horror. I don't know what I was thinking earlier. I think I'm going to blame it on low blood sugar or lack of cardio.
I understand that. I kind of have the same thing where, depending on what movies of his I'm watching, that's the kind of director he is. And my favorites of his, I don't think of him as a horror director either, in a general sense. So, I mean, and that's very common. That's actually what I think is a sign of a good director, is when you can't pigeonhole them immediately into, oh, this is the only thing this person could do. When somebody has versatility, I like the fact that I can't just say, oh, this is a X type of director. This is somebody who does different stuff. So I would actually take that as a good sign. I think it's good when you can't actually pin somebody to anything.
Especially when his science fiction is so rock solid. The movies like this one, that's is kind of more of a sci-fi action kind of film. This one is just so rock solid, and it, so I mean, you could say he defined a genre of horror movies, but he also, I feel like, this whole, not that he defined it, or like created the idea of a dystopian sort of science fiction film, but definitely this is a very important entry in the canon.
Well, William Gibson, who of course is the author of Neuromancer, one of my favorite books, has pointed out that this is an influence on that book. So in a sense, Carpenter's DNA is inside of the cyberpunk and the speculative fiction genre in that way, because if one of the people who wrote a groundbreaking book in that space says your movie influenced them, then you are part of creating that particular area. Interestingly, because you were talking about the idea of how rock solid the movie is, my favorite review I think of Escape from New York is by an individual named Christopher John, who said, quote, "It is solid summer entertainment of unusually high caliber by not pretending to be more than it is, but by also not settling for any less than it could be. Escape becomes an exciting, fast-moving drama the likes of which we haven't seen in years." End quote. That is probably one of the best reviews I've read about a movie. The fact that they're saying it's not pretending to be better, yet it never treats the audience or itself as less than what its concept and its execution could be.
You know what I really like about it is, I mentioned to you over this summer, I agree with that review. I think that's like spot on, like not taking it too seriously, but taking it seriously enough. And, watching a bunch of Carpenter movies this summer and really just sort of, looking at his entire catalog of all these different types of films, which now thinking back, like probably 90% of them were horror films, but I'll let it go. But yeah, some of the movies later on, different movies, I don't want to say they have different levels of quality, but they have different levels of sort of like tightness and production and balance of that sort of really fantastic humor that he has, really tight script writing. And where like The Thing has sort of this very tight format to it, Escape from New York for me feels like the perfect balance between sort of the camp, sort of the like fun, like the comedy, the one-liners, but then also there's really some cutting sort of scenes where you get into, even some of the things that he explored in Assault on Precinct 13, where, he was really looking at some sort of, tough issues or concepts about society and the way we deal with criminals and just, the kind of how we're on sort of just the brink of disaster most of the time, which is, big themes in Assault. And so I think it's just like the perfect balance of that. And I think we also see like, and we'll probably talk more about this, but we see like a Napoleon Wilson 2.0 in this movie, under the wonderful acting of Kurt Russell as the one and only Snake Plissken.
Yeah, it does feel like he took the two leads from Assault on Precinct 13 and blended them together, because when we get introduced to Snake, we get this entire military background, 2 Purple Hearts, all this military service, and then with no real explanation given, although you can infer a number of things from some of his comments, and of course I'll have a clip of his little speech there, which we'll get to. But this is a person who is probably the stereotypical great American soldier, war hero. In fact, he is called War Hero. He says War Hero to him at one point. And then we find out that he's been sentenced to what is basically a living hell for a very, very big robbery of the, the safety deposit vault or whatever it was. And
right.
And
but
also,
the second that's mentioned, though, don't you feel like he stole that? He stole that for a good reason. Like you just know, you don't know the story, but you just feel like that robbery or that theft happened. Like he was giving bread to the poor or something. It just felt like there was a Robin Hood aspect of it.
Well, I mean, the movie somewhat telegraphs that to some degree, because one thing that a lot of people, because it's very quick and then it's over with and it's at the very beginning, is when the plane is hijacked, the hijackers say specifically, and I'll quote it here, "Tell this to the
workers when they ask where your leader went. We, the soldiers of the National Liberation Front of America, in the name of the workers and all the oppressed of this imperialist country, have struck a fatal blow to the racist police state." What better revolutionary example than to let the president perish in the inhuman dungeon of his own imperialist prison?
I should just capture that instead of me saying it, but yeah, that is then immediately followed up by somebody who was a war hero, who then, as you said, we don't know why he robbed the bank. or the depository. But he says little things. Again, it's all about little bits of storytelling that would indicate that he's certainly not just a criminal for no reason or a joker type who has just turned his back on society. Instead, it does seem to come from probably a legitimate point of disgust or betrayal from the government itself.
Absolutely. And, that's, we just talked a bunch about Assault on Precinct 13 and all the themes in that. And we're just seeing so clearly here sort of a blending of that Lieutenant Bishop and Napoleon Wilson character kind of all into, one tight pair of leather pants.
Yeah. And I have this a little bit further down in my notes, but I'll bring it up now because it makes sense in this particular the section where we're talking about. There is something that probably most people, and I don't think I ever noticed this until I remember noticing it, I think, the second or third time back that I watched it recently. Where I noticed, I went, oh, wait a minute. The headquarters of the prison is at the Statue of Liberty. So the Statue of Liberty is now the beacon of where people are put and never let out. The opposite of freedom. The opposite of what the statue stands for. And I don't think I even know. I mean, yeah, I knew it was on Statue of Liberty. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a neat location. Sure, that's kind of funny, but not the real underlying, as you said, this is the consistent cynicism and disillusionment of what are often portrayed as American values, those American values which have changed and only been accessible to some over time.
And you almost wonder if, okay, so based on the events of Assault on Precinct 13, from a mid-70s to early 80s perspective, I mean, where are we going to be in 1997, from their point of view? And, if you just think about everything, even think about New York in the 70s and early 80s, it was like Times Square was a scary place. It was intense. And now you go and there's like the M&M store or whatever, but New York was rough. And so if you're thinking from that perspective, like what is New York going to be in the late 90s? Well, I think it's really easy to get to, well, it'll probably be a penal colony if it keeps up this way. Of course, it didn't turn out that way and it went differently. But I think these two movies are really linked. And you mentioned that earlier about, saying that maybe, there was some foundational material in Assault on Precinct 13, or that it was sort of a dress rehearsal for this later movie. And I think it almost feels like a sequel in some way, to some of the same themes that we're gonna explore in Escape from New York.
Sure. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a rough sketch of this film that was, well, in a science fiction future, what would happen if Bishop continued to see his ideals broken down? Would this not be the natural journey? I mean, even in that movie, Bishop says, you want to be a hero? Yes, sir. I mean, it all kind of, there is a rhythm to what Carpenter seems to be pointing out. And as you said, New York at one time was an extraordinarily rough and tumble place. Yeah. And then the solution to it, many have argued, was an over-policing, where it was the broken windows policy, the stop and frisk, where we obviously saw human rights or civil rights being violated. And so, yeah, had everybody just kept pushing that, and yes, let's do that, is it really hard to believe that? I mean, I read, I think, a short story somebody had written about if America had annexed Cuba and made it into a penal colony, very similar to an Escape from New York scenario. Right. And there's no doubt there are people who would want that. Yeah, Escape from Cuba, exactly. So, it's not as insane a notion as people might think. It is a science fiction film, but when people get caught up in, I don't know if hysteria is the right word, but a push towards a certain method of doing things, that's the old "it can't happen here" argument. Well, yes, it can. Don't think it's that far out. I mean, it isn't.
But I think that's the beauty of science fiction, and why I think this is such an important science fiction film is because it takes something that is within society and it just blows it way out of proportion to its extreme. When we talk about Asimov, and talking about robots, and they have to have these laws so that they don't hurt themselves or other people, like this idea that they become so sentient that they would have to have laws and restrictions so that they wouldn't, hurt people, and how those laws are even contradictions. So I think good science fiction will take something that's in our world, an issue that we're having, and take it to that extreme, take it to the, well, what if this really went as far as crime got so bad in the United States and it was so out of hand and we couldn't police it to death. We couldn't, like in Assault on Precinct 13 in that opening scene, we can't just have firing squads, like gunning down gang members. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to round them all up and put them in a camp, which if you study history at all, there are some other precedents and some other things that have happened in our world where that exact scenario has happened. And in all cases, there has been a tremendous loss of life and, in most cases, hope. So, this, but by the way, this is like kind of a fun, kind of gritty science fiction film, but it's, once again, it's addressing this really kind of negative idea that could you take a group of people that are part of society that you no longer want to be part of your society and put them all away on an island.
Right. And that definition expands and changes depending who's there. So yeah, it is always one of the great dangers that many people fall into is thinking that supporting certain things are great as long as the person they want in charge of it is doing the enforcement of it. But what happens if that changes? What happens if societal values change? Do you really want to go so far into extremism that if it flips around, guess who's going to be behind bars? Now it's going to be you. So yeah, these are,
And by the way, that's why that the review you read is fantastic, because at its deepest, that's part of this movie. And then also there's like Isaac Hayes in the movie being like a super villain running this like town. And then you have Harry Dean Stanton as sort of the like smart guy, the smart engineer. You have a man driving around in like a 1940s cab, right? So
throwing Molotov cocktails.
Throwing Molotov cocktails. He might have a screw loose too. You're not really sure if he knows he's actually there. So I think that's the fun part about science fiction is we can get into these really heavy political and also really kind of historically accurate in some ways sort of visions of the future. But at the same time, there's some entertainment and there's some storytelling. There's quite a bit of it.
You don't have to focus on any of that. If you just want a fun movie where Kurt Russell goes around and cracks wise to everybody, this movie will serve that too. You don't actually have to think about anything past that. So like you said, it's a wonderful balancing act of we're not going to pretend there's not something else underneath here, but if you don't want that and you just want to sit back and watch him run around and fight somebody in a giant wrestling ring who's got a barbed bat, sure, go for it. No problem. Yes. We're going to serve that too.
And in my 20s and as a young man watching these movies, like I'm like, that's great. And I've noticed a lot of these movies that were kind of gritty B movies that, in my youth I would watch and just enjoy on face value. Watching them later now, I see how troubled their creators were, or how cynical they were, or how tortured they were about the world around them and the direction it was going in.
So let's get into the actual film. We'll start going through it and talking about different parts of it. So again, many of you probably already know the movie, but for anybody who doesn't, essentially, as Doug laid out, this takes place in a dystopian future, depending, I guess, on which side of the wall you're on. But as we as the audience are meant to think that it's kind of bad that there's a giant prison where Manhattan used to be that nobody can ever get out of. And we are introduced to this world. You mentioned Jamie Lee Curtis, and interestingly, she does the voiceover for the opening. That is Jamie Lee Curtis. I'm going to play it. Yeah, it is. Yeah, listen, you'll hear it. Yeah, it's easy to miss because there is a lot of music over it. But it is her voice, and she will now lay out the movie for us. So here we go.
In 1988, the crime rate in the United States rises 400%. The once great city of New York becomes the one maximum security prison for the entire country. A 50-foot containment wall is erected along the New Jersey shoreline, across the Harlem River, and down along the Brooklyn shoreline. It completely surrounds Manhattan Island. All bridges and waterways are mine. The United States police force, like an army, is encamped around the island. There are no guards inside the prison, only prisoners and the worlds they have made. The rules are simple. Once you go in, you don't come out.
Interesting to note, the U.S. police force, like an army, is encamped. So again, as we talked about with Precinct 13, the militarism of the police force is already on Carpenter's mind. What is this? 42? Was it 42 years ago? Holy crap! It's 42 years ago. Yeah.
Well, it blew our mind when we said 50 with Assault on
Right.
Precinct 13. So yeah.
So we get this opening, which explains the basics of the movie, its setting, where we're going to be spending most of our time. And I actually did us all a disservice because I jumped over the theme, but I do have it because it does play before that. So let's
listen to this absolute banger.
Yeah, let us listen to this this masterwork of. There's so many with Carpenter, but let me shut up and let me play this. So I'm going to let you talk to this as the musical person in the conversation, but I will tell people, same as I said with Precinct 13, starts simple, builds up, backs down, but oh man, if this is not his best theme, I think it's better than Halloween. I know people will say that's his best theme, but for me, this is probably his best theme.
Halloween is very good. He has a lot of good ones. But this one, it's funny too, because once again, pairing it with Assault on Precinct 13. So this is like 4 movies later, right? From that movie, right? I think there has been The Fog in the interim, and what else? Has The Thing happened yet here? Let's see.
I will tell you. I was just pulled it up. So yeah, it was Halloween, The Fog. So yes, Halloween and The Fog were between these. So 2 between. This is his 5th film overall. But really, Dark Star. That one's that's kind of an experiment. But so this is really his 4th film, and to try to follow up Halloween, which has one of the most recognizable themes, and manage to do this. Oh man.
And it fits the style too. It's going to be this futuristic science fiction film, and so it fits it perfectly. And the first thing I noticed is you started playing it, and I'm like, oh, I'm hearing all this, like, it sounds like kind of like record noise. I'm hearing this like background noise, and the really cool thing about that is that's like actually part of the song at the start. Is that like sort of like a little bit of noise, and it comes out of basically nothing. A lot of the music we listen to today, and especially a lot of the soundtracks these days, are just like loud, and it's very loud and it's intense. Like I'm even thinking of the soundtrack, the Hans Zimmer soundtrack for the Blade Runner 2048, which is an amazing soundtrack. And if you ever get a chance to watch it in an Atmos theater, it is devastating. Just all the synths and all the low end. It's like this what we're hearing here, this banger, but like in 2023, just this like intense sort of evolution of it. But this and soundtracks like this are the original. And what's really nice about it, it just comes out of almost silence. So I can just imagine being in the theater, people are eating popcorn or whatever. Maybe they had just gone to the lobby. Or to the men's room,
or to the men's room,
or to the men's room, or both. And so there, there's a little bit of popcorn noise. People are kind of getting ready for the film, and just out of nowhere, this soundtrack just rises up. And it's interesting. We didn't dissect too much Assault on Precinct 13, that soundtrack, or that the one of the 2 songs that were used for that. But there's that high synth part in that as well, and you hear it also in this one. About halfway through, there's this really high piercing synth that comes in, and so it's almost like it's a very similar theme, and he was just like, hey, what if we added this, what if I did that? So it just feels like even the soundtrack got a little bit more polished. And I'm not saying the one's deficient or it's less than. I'm just saying you can see that he's growing not only as a director, as we'll talk about, but he's growing even as a composer and film score.
Well, I think that's kind of what we're getting at. Is this is a refinement of the earlier work, which doesn't invalidate the earlier work. What it does is it is an understanding of what worked and a effort to make it better. And that's what, if you are a creator, that's what you honestly often should strive for is, okay, I'm not going to say that yesterday's output was bad, but today should be better. And that's what this is okay, this other movie where I didn't have as much budget, I got the themes were
I had
there.
I had $100,000. So and now this is $6 million.
Yeah, now I have the clout, I have the ability, I have the recognition from Halloween. I can come into this thing and I can try to take that idea and stretch it out as far as possible, from sound to narrative to performance to the setting. I mean, I read he had paid, I believe it was in St. Louis where they were filming this, he had paid the city to shut the electricity off at night so he could shoot this thing. I mean, that's not an easy thing to shoot, because you're not, you're losing some resources there. So to be able to do that and execute that, to go back to the theme, it's all the same idea of how can I make the most of this idea? And like you said, it doesn't make the first idea bad. It just makes this incorporate that earlier experience and make it better.
And you kind of wonder then too, how long has this script been sitting around? You know, as once it gets released in 1981, how long had this idea been around? And was it just, you know, with the earlier smaller budgets, was it not something that was yet possible? Or he didn't think, you know, either he had the right production team or even, like we said, the budget to pull it off? Because still $6 million is not a lot of money for the time, especially when we talk about some of the later films that he'll work on. He does work on some ones that have a much higher budget and kind of a traditional Hollywood budget. But yeah, so I just feel like this is an idea that I don't think, you know, he made. I can't believe he made Assault on Precinct 13 without having some concept of this dystopian, you know, story with Snake Plissken.
Oh, sure. It could also be something where I'm sure that there were some people who could write off Assault on Precinct 13 as, oh, well, it was, you know, that was just a bad part of that city where something like that could happen. It could never happen on a bigger scale. It's like, right. Oh, really? Well, let's make it happen on a bigger scale. You know, this is where this can end up being. I read that he wrote it as a reaction to Watergate. And when you factor that in, it makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we get the opening. We have that voiceover that sets the stage, and then we get some imagery. I had already did what the revolutionaries say is they take over a plane, which we see as Air Force One, which is the president played by Donald Pleasance, who is not a newcomer to Carpenter's films. No. And he has an escape pod, which looks ridiculous when you see it, but you know,
it looks like an egg.
It looks like an egg. It's hysterical in many ways. So,
but it has the presidential seal on it, so it looks.
It does.
Legit.
So it's very, very official. Yeah. Once the seal's on there, basically now you can't buy it in a shop, and it means that you have to listen to whoever's inside it. So he gets out, the plane is crashed, and he is abducted. The police force for the island goes in, and they encounter Frank Doubleday, who was the little girl assassin from Assault on Precinct 13, playing what is a instantly memorable character named Romero. Obviously a name check back to, and there's another character in this called Cronenberg. So
well, there you go.
Yes, the influences and the respect is clear. And yes.
Speaking of Cronenberg, I know there's some part of the film or some of the practical or special effects is actually done by James Cameron, who was sort of a student of Cronenberg or was affiliated with him for quite a while. So, maybe he learned some of his. I probably learned a lot of his tricks from that director. So it's interesting how it's like there's a lineage, there's sort of a history. So even as these movies are tied to one another, it's the people who are working on them and the production teams. There's sort of this history, family tree.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of this in almost every creative thing where you have circles of people who know each other because, of course, Dark Star, Dan O'Bannon, who then did Alien, and Cameron followed that up with the sequel. So, yeah, there's a lot of this when you see we talk about the DNA of things making its way around, and there are these similar ideas and exposure to, maybe a cinematographer on the film that made Cameron look at something differently, or who knows? Right. I mean, inspiration comes from a million different places, and you often don't recognize it when it's there. So, very possible. Absolutely. So the police force goes in. They are told that he has 24 hours. I'm trying to remember that he's been captured and don't come back. And so when the police force leaves, the commissioner, whose name is Bob Hawke, played by a Western legend, which is Lee Van Cleef, finds that Snake Plissken just coincidentally happens to be showing up in the prison that very evening. And he brings him in, and he basically says, okay, we're going to give you a deal. And that part of that conversation is going to be played right now because it tells you everything you need to know basically about the whole movie. Here we go.
I'm not a fool, Plissken.
Call me Snake.
S.D. Plissken. American, Lieutenant, Special Forces Unit Black Light. 2 Purple Hearts, Leningrad and Siberia. Youngest man to be decorated by the president. He robbed the Federal Reserve Depository. Life sentence, New York Maximum Security Penitentiary. I'm ready to kick your ass out of the world, war hero.
Who are you?
Houck. Police commissioner.
Bob Houck.
Special Forces Unit Texas Thunder. We heard of you too, Pliskin.
Why are we talking?
I have a deal for you. You receive full pardon for every criminal action you've committed in the United States. It was an accident. About an hour ago, a small jet went down inside New York City. The president was on board.
President of what?
That's not funny, Pliskin. You go in, find the president, bring him out in 24 hours, and you're a free man.
24 hours, huh?
I'm making you an offer.
Bullshit.
Straight, just like I said.
I'll think about it.
No time. Give me an answer.
Get a new president.
We're still at war, Pliskin. We need him alive.
I don't give a fuck about your war. Or your president.
Is that your answer?
I'm thinking about it.
Think hard.
Yeah, so lots of information communicated right in that little exchange. Basically, the whole background of what we're looking at here.
Well, they're equals. They're colleagues. The commissioner talks about, being special forces, right? And, obviously Snake Plissken has a heroed background in the military. And it's two men who consider themselves colleagues. For some reason, though, Snake Plissken is a very dangerous man, and the commissioner sitting on the other side of the desk is a man of the law. So I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic. They sit as equals, but not in the eyes of society.
But also, importantly, in that conversation, get a new president and fuck your war. I mean, these are not, again, we said this in Precinct 13, these are not things that get written by accident. This is meant to inform what Snake's character is. Now, there was a novelization, and I don't know how much Carpenter considers canon or not, but in the novelization, Snake goes on a mission that he finds out was unnecessary, where many of his comrades are killed. And there is something along the lines of his parents being killed by police. So that makes sense to me with what this is.
Here's my thing. So I feel like in a bad movie, and I use the air quotes bad, but in a lesser script, we would see that. We would see that in this movie. There'd be like a flashback or there'd be something. And I feel like not knowing why, but having a feeling that there was something that changed him from being a hero to, why did he rob that bank? He didn't do it to make money. He did it. He must have done it for some altruistic reason, or maybe even just, sort of a revenge type thing. So I feel like leaving it out, like we talked about even in Assault on Precinct 13, leaving some information out is actually more interesting and more effective than actually just telling it. It's like, oh, well, maybe he had a daughter and the daughter was wrongfully, killed or something. You know what I mean?
No, I totally agree. I wonder whether the novelization was somebody who watched this and said, this makes sense because it was inferred, or whether it was Carpenter's notes and he chose, because they did film the robbery. The robbery was filmed. It was cut. So Carpenter made the decision to cut it, which I think is smart.
Right.
And the robbery does show some interesting things that I don't think it would have destroyed the movie, but I don't think it was necessary. No. But there is a point in that, if you watch it, where you see when they have the money, his partner is counting it, but Snake could not care less about the money. Like, he's disinterested in the money. It was more about doing the. So I think that speaks to the disillusionment.
But how did we already know that? Like, how did we just from the film? We already knew that. I've never seen that scene. I've never heard about that.
You don't need to. It's there. It's already there.
So that's and that's really powerful. If I can make one joke on the side, did you notice how loud the leather pants were in that scene?
Oh,
like,
man.
It was cutting in over the dialogue.
Oh,
I had to get that in there. There's just the constant crackling going on. And you're like, what is that? Is that like a drawer or something? So, Yeah, kudos to the sound production team for really capturing the crinkle of
the room
leather
tone
pants.
is very strong in many
tone,
Carpenter
yes.
films.
Yes.
Yeah, I've noticed that in some of his
establishing
movies. I don't want to call this a criticism, but there's been a couple of times where the dialogue has almost been overpowered by noise. It's kind of astonishing.
Yeah.
We'll hear it actually in the clip I have of him talking to Brain. There is this noise in the background that is so glaring. I don't care, but it is kind of funny that, they didn't cut that out or re-record anything, I guess.
Well, remember too, we're dealing with analog tape and we're dealing with, limited production schedules, right? So
may have not had budget. Have to get what's on there. And we got, or the performance was so good because that was the one I'm talking about is Harry Dean Stanton and Kurt Russell. It's one of these things where, you know what? Everybody nailed the lines. Who cares?
That was the take.
The performance matters.
That was the take.
Right. Yep. So Snake is basically has no real choice because it's freedom or incarceration. We did not mention, we should, that you are free to self-terminate as you enter the prison, which I think is hilarious. But basically there's a voiceover that I did not capture that says, if you would like to kill yourself, see the chaplain and you can just off yourself now. Because even that, again, underscores how bad this prison, this area is. So it is a hell on earth type of situation. And we will see that when the movie proceeds. Snake agrees. They give him what they initially tell him is an injection of, I think it's supposed to be, whatever, who cares, a vaccine or whatever it is.
Like vitamins or something. Yeah,
vitamins,
or it's a vaccine for some disease. Yeah.
And then he is told that no, in fact, what he has been injected with are 2 capsules that are already starting to disintegrate. And if they fully disintegrate, they will open up his carotid arteries and he will be dead before he hits the floor. And obviously this is a bit of a impetus for him not to just decide to disappear into the city or perhaps try to escape with the flyer he'll be taking, which makes sense. I mean, from Hawk's perspective, or Hawk, I should pronounce it correctly, it makes complete sense because he says, I'm not stupid, and he's aware of how dangerous Snake is, and even beyond dangerous, just how efficient he is. And so, of course, one of the first things he would think of is, well, let me just take the glider and go somewhere else. Screw the president. He obviously doesn't care that much. So that's their insurance policy. So he lands inside the city.
I also think from a writing perspective and from a script perspective, it starts the clock. And so then that stays throughout the movie, that constant sort of ticking clock. And I think if he just had all the time in the world to kind of just stroll around the Isle of Manhattan, I think it would have been a less effective film. The fact that from this point on in the movie, we're on borrowed time. And you just see that in every scene. He's kind of like hurrying conversations. He's trying to move through the scenery as quickly as possible because he knows he has very little time.
Or even if he had all the time, why would he care even about freedom? Freedom is I can just fly away. So it's a very smart way of not only, like you said, establishes a clock, which we constantly see him checking. He has a wrist device that he checks. But also somebody would logically say, well, why wouldn't he just leave? Why wouldn't he just escape if he's that good? Well, now he can't because... And initially, I believe, and they did use this device in Escape from L.A., they were going to tell him it was a lie, but they left it as is. So... he is...
And I was confused by that, too, because having seen both films now multiple times at different times, I couldn't remember if that was from L.A. or if that was from New York. But, yeah, I remember the double cross or the...
Yes. Yeah. The lie within the lie or whatever you want to call it. So Snake lands, begins to track him using a device that he's given, and he goes into a theater where we get little pieces of what life is like inside the city. Interestingly, I think in my notes I said you do not see daylight for an hour and 4 minutes in a 99-minute film, hour 4 before you get to any daylight.
And I think that's like the helicopter scene, right? There's a helicopter in that scene.
Yes. Yep.
And exactly. I think I just noted that because I'm always doing like a budget calculator here. So I'm just always like, okay, any scene that has a helicopter in it, that's like X of the budget or whatever.
Right. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's not cheap. Yeah. I forgot to mention the fantastic miniature work that we get when he flies in. That is not computer graphics. That is a miniature city that was built and outlined with reflective paint. But it looks fantastic, and it looks like computer graphics of the time. So they did a great job in mimicking that. Yeah. So we get that.
But the cost of that alone for a Tron-like type, visual, it just the cost alone, it would have, doubled the budget. So using that reflective tape was such an ingenious idea.
And I guarantee nobody knew. Nobody at the time would have known that. They would have been like, "Oh yeah, that's computer graphics. It looks just like it." I mean, it's expertly done.
I only knew because of like the the fun facts there as I was watching it in Prime. They have the X facts or whatever, which gives you some trivia. Yeah, and which I always find fascinating. But yeah, I was like, "Oh wow, this this is cool. Like they did a good job with these graphics." And that was one visual effect where I didn't feel any sense of 1981. Like I didn't feel like this is 1981. For me, that just felt like a kind of really sort of, interesting graphic that would be on, sort of technology of that time.
Yeah, it holds up very well, even in 4K. Absolutely. There's no seams to see because it's actually there. Mm-hmm. That's the beauty of practical in many cases, is it doesn't age badly because it's there. You don't have to worry about, the CG fading after 10 years and you going, oh boy, does this look like a PlayStation 1 game? None of that in this case. So Snake tracks down the tracker, which he finds is no longer on the president's wrist. And as he is leaving, he gets to a point of desolation where he kind of sits down, and there's a point where you're like, well, maybe I'm just screwed here. And he is interrupted. And the interesting part of this is, would he have just whiled away the time and given up if the Crazies, which is for people who have watched a lot of Romero films, that I have to take as a reference to the Romero film, The Crazies, because they use the name multiple times. And the Crazies interrupt him and drive him into a small cafe where he runs into, I believe, his girlfriend. I believe Kurt Russell was dating this actress at the time. And basically, we get an explanation of, there are many times where somebody says, oh, Snake, I heard you were dead. That's kind of a recurring thing in the whole.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then we get this little bit of dialogue, and there's a significant little chunk of this. So I'm going to play it here.
Hey, this is a real one. You just get in?
What's going on out there?
Crazies. End of the month, they're out of food.
You live here?
Skulls? Are you kidding? I'm with the Turks now. I just got caught on the street after dark, and I'm stuck here all night.
Plane crashed 7 hours ago near 8th Avenue. Did you see it?
No.
Shit.
You're a cop.
I'm an asshole.
And I'm an asshole, which is, of course, the same line that we get out of Napoleon Wilson, where he says, well, I am an asshole. You can't take everything away from me.
Can't take that away from me. Yeah, can't take everything away from me.
Yep. And again, little bits of Assault on Precinct 13 sprinkled throughout. And so... Sorry,
and also the storytelling of the, and they play around with this in Escape from LA as well, where people reference some of his more notorious acts or, I think there's is it an Escape from LA? There's the running joke about Cleveland or like Cincinnati.
Yes.
And sort of this idea that people end up recognizing or knowing him for something he did in, Cincinnati or one of these places. So once again, his reputation precedes him, and we don't know, sometimes nefarious, sometimes not, but once again, none of this is explained, but I think we infer a lot from it.
And so he escapes after the woman is pulled through the floor about 10 seconds later, and he has a long escape scene where these crazies are chasing after him, which they seem to be some version of homeless Morlocks. We don't know, but they are, even within this place, they are regarded, as far as we can tell, as the most savage people we run into, where everybody is afraid of them, even though conceivably, although we really don't know, these are some people who are heavy hitters themselves. But honestly, in this type of future, do we know that these people aren't being thrown in for jaywalking or some other puritanical reason? We really don't. So it's tough to say. So he escapes.
But the big thing is the reason why they're at the bottom of the or the worst of the worst is because they've completely lost any sense of societal sort of affiliation, where, as we'll go on, we'll meet other, groups and other characters in this society, this now, criminal society. But those crazies have just lost any sense of sort of societal, any resemblance of members of a society or even a social group. You think about like cavemen and women or cave people or Cro-Magnon people. They lived in groups and they had, a society. These people are just basically feeding on other people and seemed very disorganized and very disheveled as well. There was a lot of ripped clothing.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about what their underground life is. I mean, the thing that I think of, that the modern equivalent is in the 13th Warrior. There are the enemies of the film live in a cave, and they're basically, and that's what I would equate these people to, is that it's pure survival and nothing else. There is no, as you said, social construct. They are the equivalent of animals in this world. They are the wild animals that are in a underground forest.
But even the bear people had a queen, right? The witch, and they had this sort of kind of hierarchy. They had generals and things like that. These crazies, they just seem to basically be like, at night they come out of the sewer and they just eat people.
Pure anarchy at that point. Anarchy and cannibalism. Yeah. What a wonderful mix for a group of people.
They're a nice group. They're
fun to have at parties. So Snake escapes, and he had earlier run into Cabby, played by Ernest Borgnine, and Cabby recognizes that he's in some trouble and pulls up in his cab and manages to get him out. And there's one little bit of dialogue here, which I don't know whether this was the seed of something in Escape from L.A. or not, but I'm going to play it real quick.
Hey, Snake, when'd you get in? I didn't even know they caught you. Oh, Snake Plissken in my cab? Wait till I tell Eddie.
And, of course, in Escape from L.A., Steve Buscemi plays Map to the Stars Eddie. Now, there's no reason to think this is a reference, but I can think there is one. Why not? So, I don't know if there's anything to that or not. But as you were saying, you get a mention of, I didn't even know they'd caught you, because everybody knows who Snake Plissken is for whatever reason. And Cabby is probably one of the nicer criminals we run into. We never find out, I don't think, why he's there. I don't think he ever says, but he seems like a genial. He doesn't seem like he fits in the world. Let's put it like that.
He's not there. I feel like there's part of Cabby that has left him years ago, and maybe that's when he first came to the island or when he first got here. But there's part of him that is not functioning, and you see him still negotiating later on with Brain, and kind of. There's a little bit of, he shows a little bit of guile with, kind of outsmarting a few characters. But, he's, I think he's disassociated. I think you could say, in my unprofessional psychological opinion, he has disassociated himself from the hell that is Manhattan.
Well, it certainly does beg the question of what the Cabby service looks like in a place like this. So, I don't imagine
how much do you tip? How much do you tip?
Cabby. When you've got an escape hatch on the top where you're throwing bottles you have ready to incinerate people, I'm guessing it's a rough part of town. So,
well, maybe it's a ride, but he'll also get you out of trouble. Maybe he'll pick you up, and if some crazies are chasing you or any other nefarious elements of the city, he'll throw a fresh Molotov cocktail at them.
Maybe he's the guy that you want around when something's going wrong, and that keeps him alive, because he doesn't seem like he could survive otherwise. So there must be something. But so he picks up Snake, and Snake basically tells him what's going on, and he says, well, I'll take you to Brain. Brain knows everything, and maybe he can help you out. And so they go, and they find Brain. I believe he's in a library. I don't remember exactly, but that might have been a library that he's in. And they go in, and we find out that Snake and Brain have a little bit of history, which we also get, some nice, I think, flavoring with Snake. So I'm going to play a little bit of dialogue from that.
I'm glad you remember me. Yeah. Man should remember his past. Kansas City 4 years ago, you ran out on me. You left me sitting there.
You were late.
We were buddies, Harold. You, me, and Fresno Bob. You know what they did to Bob? You want to see him sprayed all over that map, baby? Where's the president?
I swear to God, Snake, I don't know.
Don't fuck with me.
Why do you want to know?
I want him.
Working for the man now, huh?
And I'll just beat it out of your squeeze.
Mm-hmm. Maggie doesn't know exactly where he is, and unless you know precisely where he is, you'll never find him.
So a whole bunch of great things in that exchange. One, the whole thing about the Fresno Bob, and do you know what they did to Bob, which explains his immediate venom for Harold Hellman. I love the, let's talk to him, baby, when he's talking to Adrian Barbeau. It's such a antiquated, it's just a 70s, 80s type of way of speaking. And even Harry Dean Stanton's way where he's like, swear to God, I don't know, Snake. Like the way the acting is so great with the two of them. They're a wonderful combo. Once that group is together, it's kind of like, oh, these are characters you want to see kind of running around. And that's what the rest of the movie really is.
Absolutely. And even just from the get-go, Barbeau's character is, it's reminiscent of Lee in Assault on Precinct 13. This is not a woman who, she's not hysterical. She's not, she's not getting emotional. There's not all these like tropes that you might see in a 70s film.
She pulls a trach knife instantly right out.
Yep.
She's ready to stab him.
And really, she sort of takes care of Brain. And it's kind of clear that Brain is a very smart person, but maybe not a very brave or very strong one. So she ends up sort of being, I think it's described that she's a present from Isaac Hayes' character. But it seems more like she's sort of she takes care of him and kind of keeps him out of trouble. But I love the line where the whole reason he double-crossed Snake Plissken was not for some like vengeance or some kind of, he wanted to cut him out of the money. He just said, quite frankly, you were late and you were behind schedule, and for the plan to work, you had to be on time. And I think that just says a lot about Brain's character, is that he might be somewhere on the spectrum in some way where he's just, very kind of calculating, and maybe, in the fist and push world that Snake kind of really exists in and excels in, he's not as sharp. So he needs somebody like, Barbeau's character to sort of take care of him and prevent him from getting into too much trouble.
Well, there's also an interesting aspect, too, that I think we factor into Snake's kind of view of the world, which is, again, to kind of go back to why he did what he did. He says, we were buddies. So what happened in that scenario? He was betrayed by somebody that he thought was in with him, comrade, somebody that was, a brother in arms, whatever, and finds out, nope, don't need you, I'm gone. And so yet another layer of betrayal to the character.
Which is important to Snake, right? Loyalty is important to Snake, but clearly to Brain's character, it wasn't personal. He didn't double cross him because he was jealous of him or it was personal. It's just that he didn't follow the plan. And so I think that's an interesting dynamic too, where, he's just kind of, blockheaded in that way, where, for Snake, it's all about who can you trust. And so that goes back to him, he was a war hero, and there at some point he went from being this hero and, kind of Lieutenant Bishop. At some point he changed from Lieutenant Bishop into Napoleon Wilson.
And also with the character of Maggie, it's interesting because you point out that Cabby says to Snake, he says, yeah, she was a present from the Duke to keep Brain happy. And the way that's set up, and at least at first you think, oh, okay, that's the dynamic. She's essentially like a non-paid prostitute for him.
Right.
But
a paramour
when you get to when you jump to the end of the movie, when Brain is killed, and we're jumping around a little bit, but when Brain dies, she immediately is, okay, now I'm going to go out in a suicide mission, at least attempting to kill the Duke. The loyalty is absolute, which is why I think when Snake looks at her, he says, come on, Maggie. And she just looks at him and he understands right away what's going on. And he looks sad, but I think it's also because, no, this is what his version of the world should be. She's loyal to Brain to the death. He's dead. Well, now I'm going to die too. So it's a great setup and payoff.
And all the cynicism and all the, all the kind of gloom and doom of this dystopian world. I mean, I think that is still the little bit of hope that comes through in this movie, is that there are characters that are still interested in doing the right thing, or are interested in loyalty and some of those things that pretty much have seemed to kind of go out the window. Because if you think about it, they didn't get a hero to come in and save the president. They got somebody who would get the job done. And someone who, like you said, could have euthanized himself at the start of the movie, because that's sort of the police state that they're in at that point.
So then we get the action-y bit of the movie where they attempt to. So Brain takes him to try to find the president, who's being tortured by Isaac Hayes as the Duke of New York, a wonderful character that we know next to nothing about, and yet all the charisma, the personality, the swagger, it's all there because Isaac Hayes is Isaac Hayes, and Carpenter clearly knew who he was getting and was just like, nope, just play it smooth, and we don't have to worry about anything else with you. And you instantly do understand this character, and it's very clear why he's in the position that he's in. But what's interesting is he is essentially the president of this country. Absolutely. And so the inverse of Donald Pleasance, who he is tormenting.
Right. And that's the thing too, you mentioned this is, hell on earth. I think part of the point of the film is that so there's the crazies, right? There's certain people that are eating other people, right? That's going to happen in a place like this. You have the theater scene where there's men dancing for other men. There's just all different types of things you see going on. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I just mean it's like you're just seeing all the different sort of ways that people are interacting. But still, even in this, what's supposed to be this hell on earth where these like horrible criminals live, they still have a form of society, and they still have a connection to this idea that you would have somebody in charge. And, it's not based on loyalty, it's based on fear, right? While people are loyal because they're afraid. But then again, if you're talking about they have to, in the society, put people in a separate island, and then the police have to act as a military presence to keep them in there, then how is this not just, the Duke who kind of rules by fear and sort of, priority? How is it any different than, basically the police state that is surrounding them?
Well, it's not as if we don't have a modern parallel to people who feel intimidated and afraid turning to a strong man, even if the person they're turning to might not be actually as good as they are meant, or delude themselves into thinking they are. So this does make complete sense. Yet another prescient element of Carpenter's recognition that people will turn to authority if they feel afraid enough, and it probably doesn't even take that much fear. So the Snake is captured. We get a classic scene where he is forced to fight a very large wrestling gentleman. And there's a funny bit of trivia about that, where apparently the guy was hitting Kurt Russell a bit too hard, and Kurt Russell gave him a little bit of a beanbag check, if you know what I mean, below the belt kind of indicator of maybe somebody's gonna get hit back to lighten him up. He manages to turn the tables on this guy in a scene that I was reminded in 13th Warrior, where he's kind of playing, I think, where he's debilitated and then does a turnaround move. And so as that's going on, we find out that Brain has basically taken the president and is trying to escape with him, which diverts the Duke, and that's why Snake isn't killed on sight. And then we encounter the president, Brain, and Maggie on the rooftop of the World Trade Center where Snake landed. They throw his plane over the side, which kills that escape route. And so they are forced to try to escape using a mined bridge, using a map that Brain has. And in the course of that escape, that is when Brain is killed. Maggie goes out shooting at the Duke as he drives his car into her. And man, that scene is so well done, because it sure looks like he's running into her. Because
Hopefully no one was harmed in the filming.
No. And so then we come down to basically Snake and the president make it to... and Cabby's blown up. So basically it's just Snake and the president. They make it to the escape wall, basically, where they have a harness. The president is lifted out. Snake, with about a minute left on his timer before his neck will explode, starts to go up. He's halted by the president, who then guns down the Duke in cold blood, viciously over and over and over, shoots him full of holes. They bring Snake up, and they deactivate the explosives. Again, whether real or not, they play it as real. You can infer whether that's theater or not, but I think it's supposed to be that they actually did it, because the guy who does it was the one who told Houck to tell him about the capsules in the first place. That, to me, reinforces that in this movie it is supposed to be real, because some people have debated, well, maybe they were never real. Well, then why would that guy react that way? So I'm meant to think it's real. And so Snake has gotten the president out, along with a cassette tape that we are told contains some kind of nuclear fusion technology And
Right.
so the idea is that there is a summit to try to end this global war. We don't get much about it, but we understand it
Right.
involves at least China and Russia, I believe, but it seems to be a
Yep.
global conflict. And so the fusion, I guess, offering, although I never really am convinced that it's that altruistic, more of a, well, we've got this tech. Do you want to suffer? I don't know. What is your read? I'm always curious about this. What is your read on what that tape is meant to be?
So the really subtle thing that happens with the president, and this is one thing that I have in my notes. And so the president you see at the beginning, and I think he's presented as probably being a pretty great president, or at least a president who is honorable. And maybe, at the time, if this is in the 80s, you think about, well, some of the presidents at that time, and you think about some of the presidents in this time. But I think you get this idea that he is a president embroiled in a war, and he's dealing with sort of negotiating terms to save humanity. So you have some impression about him that maybe he is somewhat effective. And throughout the movie, there are scenes with him, and specifically the scenes where he's interacting with the criminals. Even the character, I'm forgetting his name now, with the crazy hair.
Romero. I love that guy.
Romero. Of course, how could I forget that name, right? But with Romero and his interactions with this, and how they're kind of toying with him and sort of humiliating him, and how sort of weak he looks. And so you're just kind of like, oh, well, this president is really just kind of not a very strong character. I mean, he gets more humiliated than Brain does in the movie. So, and you can tell it's not that he gets really he gets very marginalized in the movie by these criminals. And then what I think you see in the last maybe 10 minutes of the movie, he guns down the Duke, right, in a very vicious way. And then you see him sort of, kind of thank Snake, go about his business. And the next thing you know, he's putting makeup on and he's getting ready to do the show. And I think that's a really subtle performance by Donald Pleasance, but I also think it's written into the script to kind of be like, oh, he's the president of the United States. He must be this charismatic, normal person who is trying to do the right thing. And this liberation front is he's been taken by terrorists, and you watch, you just kind of, I don't feel like in those scenes, he really shows any sort of backbone, but then he does show at the end that you start to wonder, you're like, is he really a good person? Or kind of like in Assault on Precinct 13, is he the authority, and the authorities, are they part of the problem?
Yeah, and that has always been my read of this, to the point where I always forget that the tape is what they say is nuclear fusion and not a nuclear weapon. I always remember it as a weapon, that and that's why Snake doesn't want him to have the tape. But yes, you're right. There is definitely this element where he is portrayed on the plane as steadfast and noble and, thank you for your service and all that. But we have to remember, the plane was taken over by people saying they represented the workers. So there is a back and forth here. But then, yes, his finger is cut off. He is constantly tortured. When Brain finds him, he is wearing what appears to be a woman's wig. Again, this is visual symbology. Fantastic. This is not accidental.
Fantastic.
It's, it's the emasculation of the power character.
Right.
And so then when he guns down the Duke, it is what looks like animalistic rage, and what I interpret as, I now know I am secure from any threat, therefore I can act with barbarity. The dominance, the supreme position of somebody with a gun firing down at somebody else.
I didn't read it that way. I read it as the reason why Snake robbed that bank is the president is part of that reason, is because the people who are in charge are vicious.
Oh, no, I agree. I'm saying it's a
suits.
projected front. So all of his nobility is a false front, that it's projected.
Absolutely. And when it comes down to it, he, like, not that he had much choice. I mean, there was a gang of criminals, but he was humiliated, emasculated, but I think he's every bit as violent and as vicious as the criminals that were in the city. He just often wears a suit. He wears a suit to work. He doesn't have chandeliers on his awesome Cadillac.
Well, he has an
I have to
army
mention
to
the
be-
chandeliers on the Duke's car, by the way.
Oh, no, they're great.
like,
And a disco
the
ball inside.
coolest,
They're fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But also, a president has a military and a police force to be brutal for him. He could disassociate himself from what his actual policies enforce on people. So, I agree. I think we're on the same page. It is.
Yeah.
I have never looked at him as a good character. There's always a sinister undertone to that character, and I think that's what Carpenter's seeing. But I will play, because I do have the ending dialogue, because I think it is significant. So I will play that. This is so after the president's been rescued, he's getting prepped to go on television to do, I think, a satellite attendance of this concert, and then Snake comes,
which
up
was
to him
really
to get
important because the conference was really important for the basically, this nuclear threat that was basically imminent.
The Peace Summit in Hartford, Connecticut, of all places, someplace you and I are familiar with.
The Paris of Connecticut.
The Paris of Connecticut.
It's often called that.
So we get this little bit of dialogue. Here we go.
I want to thank you. Anything you want, you just name it.
Just a moment of your time.
3 minutes, sir.
Yes?
We did get you out. A lot of people died in the process. I just wondered how you felt about it.
Well, I want to thank them. This nation appreciates their sacrifice. Look, I'm on the air in 2.5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
So the thing about this sequence is everything the president says feels like it is that something that was written down in a book, that this is what the president says at these particular moments. I think even his reaction to Snake, where he's like, oh, thank you, anything you want, he expects to be asked for something. And when Snake just says, yeah, I just want to talk to you for a minute, he's thrown off. You see immediately that he's uncomfortable with somebody not reacting in what is probably the perceived correct response, which is everybody wants something. What is it that we're paying you off with for this particular job? And so when he asks him what he feels like, it is the stock answer of, well, I'd love to thank them too. Oh, we owe them a great service, but with no emotion, no visible anything outside of, here is the line that I need to give you so you go away, right? This is what you expect me to say. And then you'll leave me alone because I have to be on TV, and that's my real place to be invested and involved.
Absolutely. And Donald Pleasance, like the subtlety of his performance, if you notice, before he delivers that very hollow line of, oh, well, of course, we thank them and their, contribution, he like coughs a little bit, as almost like he's like queuing up the tape. Like he's queuing up here's the appropriate response. Like you said, like he was like kind of going through to be like, oh, okay, what is the appropriate response? And with that little cough that he makes, he kind of exposes to us that his brain kind of stutters for a minute, because he's, like you said, he's like taken aback. And then he's just like, he says the most hollow, like it just sounds so empty. And even after he says it, it almost feels like he's like, wow, that did not really land. And that did not sound sincere.
And I think that's part of where you say that it's the calculation of, is this the appropriate answer to get this person away from me? What does it need to be said so I can get to the real business, which is addressing these people who I consider my equals. And after that scene, we then see Snake walking away, and Hauk is there. And Hauk, as you pointed out, who is an equal of his, immediately says, I think you and I could work well together, which makes me wonder if Hauk doesn't necessarily agree with him, but also sees through all the bullshit of it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so, but Snake basically says, well, before he says, you're going to kill me, and Snake says, I'm too tired, because he had promised to kill him. And then we see Snake famously take the tape and rip it apart. And then the movie just ends. Then we get a fade to black, because essentially he has this, even though, of course, logically there have to be 1 million of those tapes, but the movie is saying he has destroyed what we are meant to think is the one apparently tape that has this, this way to end the war on it.
Which in all seriousness, like that's probably why society is not doing so well in this movie. If they're going to only make one copy of the tape, like, I mean, like there's some other issues here. If you're not making backup copies, I mean,
yes.
I won't launch into a file management tirade here, but that is very poor file management world of Escape in New York. Very poor file management indeed.
Well, or it is yet another clue that Pleasance is actually an inept and completely ineffective leader who is just good at delivering speeches, which maybe that is what it's meant to be. And so it works on a number of levels.
Yeah, he's a criminal just like everyone else in the movie. He just wears a suit, and he, like you said, he's studied the cards. He knows exactly what to say and when to say it.
And that's Escape from New York. I didn't think we'd have quite as much to say because on this, and I kind of am in the same boat, because we said a lot of what this movie is saying with Precinct 13. That's why they work so well together. But it is definitely, to look at it objectively, you can see how it is a better overall film because it's tighter. It's cleaner. But it is absolutely because the Precinct 13 came first. That was the rough sketch of this in a lot of ways, which as a rough sketch, it came out beautifully, but you can see where it looks like essentially what Carpenter was doing was picking out the knives in the first movie. And this is the one where he's got them sharpened to the point where he can cut through stone. And that's what Escape from New York is.
And I agree. And, that's my takeaway from this film and from pairing them like we did with, Escape and Assault paired together, is that's really, I feel like that's probably every creative person's dream or goal, is that, everything you do is of a certain quality, but that everything you do, or as you continue to grow, evolve, and change. And, there's some directors that basically just rewrite the same movie over and over again and make it better and better. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Like a lot of times you're just like, great, it's just like a better version. But I think instead we're seeing a real master here who can basically take the same sort of themes and same sort of ideas and execute them either in a different genre or in a different way to just make them even more effective. But at the end of the day, this commentary on police states and about the, sort of the wheel of society and sort of bureaucracy, it's all still there in really vivid and sort of visceral manner.
Yeah, and we will see it continue in later films. Some of us will discover where, it feels like he gets into more specifics of these ideas and kind of starts dividing them into whole films. But as you say, the totality of the cynical, nihilistic individual is all over these movies. If there are, if any pair of films are the what's the word for it? The visual demonstration of a person's soul, it's probably these two for John Carpenter. You kind of, if he had disappeared, like, who was it? Steinbeck or whoever it was that wrote the one book and vanished. If only these two movies existed, you would have everything you would ever need to know about John Carpenter. So they are just absolutely sensational movies. Fantastic stuff.
But fortunately for us in the podcast, but fortunately, he made many other films, and some of the cynicism will go even further. And like you just said, we see it pop up in very sort of almost like microscopic ways in other films. And you said we're not gonna divulge yet what we're gonna do for the next ones, but I don't know if you want to do that at some point, or we'll keep it a mystery.
Let's keep it a mystery. I like the hook of what will the next. Yeah. I gave a bit of a clue in the first segment. I'll say it again. Yeah. The next two films are what I would call aberrations within his catalog for kind of polar opposite reasons. And and you should be able to get enough from that. But I'll go one little bit further by saying one of them people will probably say I should put as an asterisk as a Carpenter film, even though it absolutely is a Carpenter film.
It absolutely is. Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think it'll be I think we could have just done all the, we could have done the real canon movies.
The hits, the hits.
Yeah, we could have done the hits, but we're going to play a few slow songs here. So maybe that's when everyone goes to the bathroom, right? Or it's to the lobby, right? During the slow songs.
That's right. So, all right, one last reminder that Doug's album is out on October 27th, Music for Billionaires. You can pre-order it at the address that was at the top of the video. And Doug will be back. We'll do the next set of films. And this has been a lot of fun, and I think it's just going to get more and more fun because as the acid increases, so shall the commentary. Doug, thanks for doing this, man. We're going to do this again. We'll do our next pair of films. And by all means, let me know what you think of our takes on this stuff because the beautiful part about these films and some of my favorite films are the ones where different people have different reads. So there is no such thing as a bad take when it comes to art, except if you say it sucks, because that's not an answer. But as long as you have a reason for something, I'm always interested in people who see something differently. That is the beauty of creative work, is interpretation and different perspectives that are brought to it. So, I think on that note, I don't know that I can finish off a show any better. So, Doug, thanks again for being part of this, and we're going to keep plugging along.
Thanks, Joe.
Sure. And everybody else, we will talk to you in the next episode, and I can't wait. Because, boy, these, not a bad movie in the bunch, but the middle ones might be my favorite ones to talk about. We'll see. All right, everybody. We'll talk to you in the next show.